What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Lich King saved Naruto from Konoha? Part 1. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments, and also check the description box to original creator of this beautiful creation. You believe you know all about the Lich King and his successor, but you don't know anything at all. Here is the real tale about a king's need and a boy's rise to power. Elemental Nations. Fire Country. Konoha. 4 years since the Kyuubi attack, nighttime. It had been 4 years since Minato Namikaze sealed the beast known as Kyuubi into his newborn son, Naruto. It has been 4 years of peace for the village and everyone is content and happy. Except one person, that is. You see, the villagers never honored the request to see his son as a hero and to protect him, while the third Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, never really cared, as he didn't feel he could assert his position without risking it being lost, and if that meant allowing the public to get their 10 pounds of flesh, literally in some instances, from the boy, then he would allow it so long as they didn't actually kill him. Of course, this was kept from people who would have stopped it. Namely the clan heads, friends of the boy's parents, and the boy's godparents, the former using their clans to protect the boy and make many unhappy, the middle striking down anyone who tried to harm the boy, and the latter either taking the boy away or staying to crush anyone who tried to harm him. Hiruzen now stood on a building watching Naruto run for his life, again, from a mob, again, while waiting for them to catch him, beat him for a good while, and then he would swoop in and save him, so Naruto would feel indebted and loyal to him and he could ensure Naruto stayed in the village, again. Seeing them corner him in an alley, Hiruzen left the area to gather a few Anbu to control the situation. You see, Hiruzen, never believing in the teachings of his predecessors or their family's views on Jinchuriki, couldn't allow the people who would defend Naruto to do so, because the boy had to be loyal to Konoha and protect it, as it would deter anyone from trying to go to war with them, since Naruto held the strongest of the tailed beasts. Jinchuriki were weapons and Naruto was going to be one for Konoha, no matter what had to be done to ensure it occurred. The rest of the world could burn and its people suffering eternal torment for all he could care, as long as Konoha was the strongest and stood above everything else. If he only knew that some of that would occur to people in the future, and the entity that would be the catalyst was approaching as the current attack was happening, or that he was about to lose that which he desired to keep, and his views would unleash a wrath upon him that he could never have fathomed. In the nearby shadows and darkness, a man outfitted in gray plate armor, a tri-horned helmet, black cape, a pale blue glowing sword underneath said cape, and all of said armor and sword were covered in skulls, stood in the shadows watching the mob attack, while 3 figures stood beside him. One was a man outfitted in black plate armor with twin swords strapped to his side in pale skin from what was shown. Another was a skeleton with sharpened teeth and elongated canines that was wearing long flowing robes and a headdress, while he gave off a chilling feeling. And the last was a woman who was dark-skinned, white-haired, and had blood-red eyes, pointed ears, and light metal armor that accentuated her body's curves, with a hooded cloak covering most of her form. The first was Arthas Manethil, the Death Knight turned Lich King. The man was Falric Malwin, Arthas's most trusted captain when they were human, and now Arthas's most trusted Death Knight and commanding general of the Death Knight Order. The skeleton was the wizard turned necromancer turned Lich known as Kel'Thuzad, who was Arthas's major domo, advisor, trusted confidant, etc. etc. And the last was Varisa Windrunner, younger sister to Sylvanas Windrunner, not OC, and Shadow Hunter, in service to Arthas of her own free will, after she aided in the destruction of Quel'Thalas by showing Arthas the way into her people's home, and then was killed by her own people before Arthas resurrected her. Now, you might be wondering why these beings were here. Well, the answer is they felt the power of Kyuubi during the attack 4 years ago from their realm and spent time and energy to find a way to this realm. Now they were here and were bearing witness to the holder of the being they were searching for. These fools harm that which they could use to claim more land for themselves. I will never understand mortals, even if I was one at one point in time. Arthas spoke as he saw the boy fight back, only to be harmed worse. The others nodded. They are hopeless, my king. They are not ignorant because no one has taught them better, they are ignorant because they choose to be. What are your orders? Kel'Thuzad spoke as he saw the boy actually held high potential, as seen from the multitude of wounds Kel'Thuzad could see him being inflicted with, and he was still struggling. Arthas stood there a moment. Kill them, but spare the boy. Kel, prepare the gate to return home. We'll be taking the boy with us." They nodded and Falric charged forward before cutting down members of the mob while Verisa shot them with her bow and Arthas calmly walked forward before leaping over and standing in front of the boy. "You will not harm this boy," Arthas stated while Falric stopped his attack for his king to keep their attention while Verisa held her bow still until the fools made a foolish move. The mob froze at the sight of the man in front of them. "Hey! Get out of the way so we can kill that demon," shouted a random villager while the crowd gave shouts of confirmation and Naruto hid behind his savior. The response they thought they would get was him moving once he realized this boy was a Jinchuriki demon and then aiding them in attacking. The response they got was a dark and chilling laughter. "You fools, the boy isn't a demon. He merely is the prison for it and I cannot allow you to harm him as he could be of use to me." In a swift motion he drew his sword and cut 10 in half while their souls were absorbed by his blade, Frostmourne. As if on cue, Falric cleaved through another dozen and 6 more were dead with black arrows, which then rose up as skeletons outfitted in armor with a large shield and sword that began attacking the mob as well. The mob charged Arthas but he simply raised his sword and cut through another 5 before his sword pulsed and the corpses, that didn't change into dark minions, the skeletons, reformed and started attacking the mob as well. Within moments, the mob was dead or turned into dark minions to serve Arthas as his soldiers. Arthas then turned towards Naruto who was looking at Arthas with both awe and fear. "Do not fear me, boy. That comes later," he spoke and then added mentally, "If I planned to harm you, then I would have allowed that mob to continue with attacking you." Naruto seemed relieved at that and bowed before smiling. "Thank you, Mr." Naruto spoke before stopping as he had no idea how to address the man before him. Arthas smiled at the boy from behind his helmet. "Arthas Menethil. I am also known as the Lich King and leader of the undead scourge in another world called Azeroth, which lies beyond the true boundaries of this world," he stated while seeing Naruto's eyes widen. "Wow, it's an honor to meet you, Your Majesty." "Oh, I'm Naruto Uzumaki, sir," Naruto said while bowing again, having seen other people do the same when the daimyo came to the village at times. Arthas chuckled. "You are very respectful, young man. I feel that I must ask, do you know why they attack you?" Arthas stated as he wanted to know how much the boy knew, especially since 2 of the souls that he just took were knowledgeable about Naruto. Both were privy to information on what was sealed into the boy exactly, who the boy's parents were, and what he was entitled to for his lineage as well as what happened to his families on both sides. One man held this information because he had some dealings, so to speak, with a pink-haired, which Arthas found strange, member of the civilian council, which Arthas found ludicrous as civilians had no right to have a say in military affairs, on an almost weekly basis, and another man that was apparently part of a shut-down military program of this village. The man's job was to ensure the boy didn't die if Hiruzen wasn't fast enough to stop the situation. Naruto nodded and looked down. "Yes, they hate me for having the 9-tailed demon fox sealed inside me." Arthas raised an eyebrow at the fact that apparently this world's demons were animals in appearance as the demons of his world were classified as monstrosities. But Naruto took it as Arthas asking how he knew what was sealed inside him. "With the constant beatings and close brushes with death that I have experienced, it is only natural that I met it since it has kept me alive." Well, it did, before stating that if I didn't become stronger to become a worthy host, then it was not going to help me much more than necessary for it to survive. Using it for the fox for the time being, because 1, Naruto doesn't know it has gender let alone what it is, as they are at the whole "I'll help keep you alive but nothing more" phase right now, and 2, if you want Kyuubi paired with Naruto then I will make it a female, and if not then it will be male. The only other time I see a female Kyuubi working when not paired with Naruto is when she takes on a mothering role, or in the case of one story I read, she actually was his mother. Arthas nodded at the reasoning, both for knowing of the fox and its willingness to help. If he himself were somehow sealed into a being, then he would not tolerate a weak host, as that would be an insult to his power and title. "Then I may have an offer for you, boy." He saw he had Naruto's attention. "I require a successor, and while I am unlikely to die and am still able to have heirs, I feel you have great potential, and I have lived long by planning out every scenario possible, and there must always be a Lich King. However, I require only strong heirs, so if this demon of yours will train you in this world's arts and forms of combat, then I shall train you in ours and make you into a force that is worthy of both of us." Also, you may turn down the throne should you wish, and I will grant a request should it be in my power to do so. So child, what say you and your tenant? Naruto's eyes beamed in excitement before they glazed over and then changed back. The fox said it agrees. Arthas saw he was holding something back and motioned for him to speak, but it also says that if you try to take its power or try to enslave us in any way, then it will show you why it is the strongest of the tailed demons. Naruto finished nervously as this man could strike him down or rescind the offer to train him if he felt insulted. However, he was shocked when Arthas laughed. I would expect nothing less from a demon lord. But no, even I could not control or harness such power without assuming a large risk. So your tenant has nothing to fear of me. Now come along and remember that no matter what you see or sense, nothing will harm you while I am around. Except during your training, of course. Arthas stated and then added mentally as he was already planning out how to train the boy and was sure the demon was doing the same. Falric. The other man Naruto saw came up and stood at attention. You and Verisa take young Naruto back to Kel and cross over as soon as he is done. I sense some people coming to stop us and I will keep them from doing so. Falric nodded and motioned the boy, who would more than likely be his commander one day if he proved himself, to follow him while the dark minions took up positions around him while the woman took the front beside Falric, though Naruto blushed at her beauty and her outfit, which for some reason got her to smile, but not in any form of amusement. As they left, Arthas stood in the center of the street outside the alley with Frostmourne grasped in his hands, point down, in front of him while breaking his control over the corpses. As they were just limited ones, not true undead, this caused them to explode in blood and gore. All of which missed Arthas entirely. Less than a minute later, Hiruzen and 6 Anbu jumped down in front of him, notably a dolphin, dog, weasel, and cat masked Anbu. The other two were just cannon fodder. What have you done with Naruto Uzumaki? Hiruzen demanded while suppressing his shudder at the feeling of death the figure before him gave off along with the blade he held, while the Anbu were doing the same. This feeling only increased as the person chuckled darkly. I don't know a boy by that name. I do know a boy named Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, son of Minato, Yellow Flash, Namikaze, also known as the 4th Hokage, and Kushina, Red Death, Uzumaki, the crown princess of Whirlpool and the former container of the Kyuubi no Kitsune, which is now imprisoned inside Naruto. As he finished speaking, he saw Hiruzen and the 4 specifically identified members of Anbu stiffen before the 4 directed killing intent at Hiruzen. Yes, I know who and what he is. And I can honestly say that I am disgusted that you would betray him and his family like that, especially since you allowed his mother's murderer to go free and even lied to his grandparents about him. Which in turn means you betrayed them and your predecessor, since his grandmother's grandmother was your teacher's sister-in-law and was also the first container of the Kyuubi. This got further shocked looks, and the 4 Anbu were now directing even more killing intent at Hiruzen with rage evident in their stances. Then there is the fact that you willingly allow him to be beaten into submission and nearly killed on a daily basis to force him to be this village's lapdog and slave and keep the competent and caring soldiers from getting to him before he has been dealt what you consider appropriate levels of damage. However, that will change now that I have taken him under my wing and am making him my heir. Arthas finished stating while feeling the 4 getting angrier at Hiruzen, who was ready to have a heart attack at the prospect of losing the Kyuubi. You will not take Naruto, his place is here. Hiruzen rushed forward only for Arthas to backhand him, with speed that shouldn't be possible with the armor Arthas wore, and send him flying into a wall. Arthas simply rolled his neck. You have allowed time to crush you, old man. I, on the other hand, can and have transcended time and kept my body in shape. Your current form is too pathetic to be a threat to me. Arthas stated while feeling the Anbu were hesitant since he basically just treated the leader of their village, aka the strongest person in the village, like an Anbu would treat a civilian attacker that had no training, and was blind, and deaf, and only had 2 fingers holding the weapon they were attacking with, while only using 1 leg to move. The boy is already gone and is beyond your reach. Even his demon is willing to go along with this to have a host that is worthy of containing it. Or did you assume he was so foolish that all those near-death experiences wouldn't have forced him to meet the very thing keeping him alive throughout the pain he was enduring? You are a sad empath. He was stopped as the 2 no-named Anbu struck out at him, and in a swift motion he bisected one and blasted the other with a putrid green skull. The second one dropped screaming as his body withered away into nothing. Arthas then pivoted and backhanded Dolphin, before spinning and kicking Dog in the chest. He then turned his blade and slammed the side of it into Cat, before he swatted away a fireball from Weasel, and then moved forward and buried his fist into Weasel's gut, forcing him to hunch over and then get sent flying backwards from the hit. Arthas merely retook his starting position as he looked at them, trying to get back up. "You mortals are all fools. I may have been one of you in the past, but no longer. You are not even worth my time, but be warned, should you continue to test my patience, not even your gods will interfere to save you." He paused for a minute before sighing, "More insects to deal with," he stated as more Anbu came into the clearing with weapons brandished. He simply raised his blade again and the Anbu he bisected and some of the mob corpses rose while being extremely pale. "Deal with them until I am gone," he commanded, while adding the mental command of, "Do not kill or cripple the old one or the 4 injured. The old one will be dealt with in time, and the 4 actually did their job when they were not being conspired against." As he finished giving orders, he turned and started walking away. Of course, Hiruzen and the others tried to stop him, but met heavy resistance from the corpses, as no matter how much damage they did to them, the corpses just attacked again. Meanwhile, Arthas walked to where Kel'Thuzad held the portal. "Are we done here, my king?" asked the Lich as he saw his king and friend approach him, and the gait he maintained, with a purpose showing in his steps. Arthas stayed silent a moment before a cruel smile made its way to his face. "We are done here, but I feel my new heir has only just begun to deal with this village," Arthas stated cryptically as he turned just before entering the portal to see the Hokage there with his robes gone and showing his samurai-type armor that was dented and he himself was scraped and beat up. "Begin praying my heir never returns here. For if he does, it will be the end of you, and no one, not even your gods or soldiers, will help you," Arthas stated while going through the portal with Kel'Thuzad, the latter of which had frozen the Hokage from the feet to his waist, literally, before the portal closed behind them. Azeroth. Northrend. Ice-crowned Citadel. At that moment, Arthas exited the portal to find Naruto sitting cross-legged on the floor of his citadel. He turned to Falric, who simply bowed. He stated the demon inside wanted to talk and he should get comfortable. Arthas nodded and was about to reply when they felt a surge of demonic energy come from Naruto and saw his body filling out more. His muscles seemed to grow on him while his fingers were claws and his whisker marks got more defined. Naruto opened his eyes to show they were red and slitted before they returned to normal along with his whisker marks and fingers. "I'm sorry if I have disrupted something, your majesty, but Kyuubi was telling me that my body was damaged from the trauma I had suffered and did a small jumpstart to get my body back into shape to train while it works on finishing the procedures to heal me completely." Arthas nodded while being intrigued. "Interesting, can it jumpstart you again? And what level of effectiveness are you at right now?" he asked as he wanted the boy to be ready to train immediately, and Arthas planned to be a better king and instructor than his own father ever was. Especially since Naruto's potential with his lineage alone was staggering, and then add the demon fox, the training he would receive, and whatever Arthas could add to the mix, and Naruto could rival him during his Death Knight days before Naruto even turned 20. Naruto's eyes glazed for a second before stating, "Yes, but it would take some time as my body can't handle it yet. Also, my effectiveness is at 80% according to Kyuubi. It says that in a few years' time it should be able to jumpstart me again and fully restore my body to the point where there would be no trace of what I had gone through." Arthas nodded and motioned for Naruto to follow him before walking over to a large ledge that overlooked a frozen landscape with large black gates blocking the ways into the land in the distance. "This is my kingdom, Naruto, and there are those who wish to take it from me and then kill me. They think that I am my predecessor and hate me for my path of destruction that I caused while in the service to my predecessor. However, it was necessary as it was done to allow this realm's people a chance to destroy an army that sought to enslave and consume this world before moving to others. While in the service to my predecessor, I was controlled to the point that I was only able to be myself in combat or when I held conversations with my fellow Scourge commanders. But even then I had limited control and had to hide my feelings on different subjects so the former Lich King would not be aware of it. I made many enemies that way, and many more as they either want me dead to destroy my undead minions or to take my place and then conquer the world. I desire this world as it is in turmoil, and many beings in it just deserve to die, and the so-called heroes of this world are too busy either focusing on me, flaunting their power and wealth, or using their power to get something they want, to pay attention to the people that are suffering. I also desire a realm beyond an open portal, called Outland, in order to do what my enemies were unable to do and destroy the remnants of the enemy I spoke of before. I do not want all races dead, but I do want obedience and loyalty. Arthas stated before he then explained to Naruto that his forces were losing for 5 years of war until 5 years ago when he destroyed his predecessor and assumed total control. How he then began coordinating attacks and such that pushed his enemies away from his main stronghold, and this was continuing. Now, young one, I hope to turn you into a destructive force that can aid me in crushing the rest of the invaders before expanding to claim this world and its races as my soldiers. If it is not possible in my lifetime, then I want you to do so as my heir, which is why I wish to tell you about your parents and give you a new name in addition to your own that will be used when you are leading, while your true name will be for those close to you. Naruto's eyes widened, and before he could ask questions, Arthas raised his hand. I will not tell you now. You need more control, because from what I was able to glean from one of the ninjas of your world is that when you get into any emotional level you can't handle, then you release your demon's power, which could prove dangerous to myself and my allies, as our power originated from a demon's and we do not wish to risk it. However, as I know you are a curious lad, if you are able to discern who your father was on your own, without your demon's help, then I will reveal everything I know. Is that agreeable? At Naruto's nod, Arthas grinned and replied, marvelous. Then, from this point on, you will be known to any servants of yours as Ammon Menethil, the Prince of Death, and we will begin your training immediately. With that, Arthas led him back into the citadel. 6 years later. In the last 6 years, Naruto had excelled and grown from the scared child that Arthas had saved into a warrior prodigy and had been a great boon to the Scourge as they continued to push back the invaders of Northrend. All of Icecrown was now free again, and the Storm Peaks were getting there. This was partially accomplished by Naruto sneaking into Alliance, Horde, and the neutral factions' camps, whether normal or under a henge, to poison the supplies or sabotage the armories. What shocked the actual intelligent undead commanders was how easily they had come to care for the boy, and not just because he was the future leader if Arthas fell. Arthas was even at the point that he actually cared for Naruto as a son and began planning on getting him mother figures, as he had his eye on some women that he truly cared for and could be powerful queens to rule beside him and aid Naruto in growing as well. One such person was his first love, Jaina Proudmoore, who he turned when he himself snuck into Theramore and showed that he still had the same feelings and loyalty that he always did while there was no trace of Ner'zhul left. She joined him, and then he converted her to a new mage version of a Death Knight called a Shadowmancer. She was essentially a mage combined with a necromancer, but with the powers of a Voidwalker, and had powers over darkness and shadows. Needless to say, Arthas aided in her training before having her train more soldiers in the arts. Now, you all might be going, what the hell do you mean love? He carved his heart out to get rid of that love because he thought it was a weakness. And normally you would be correct, however it was Ner'zhul's influence that wanted him to do it, as he feared Arthas may break free from his control and influence if Jaina ever confronted him. For this reason, and the fact that Ner'zhul couldn't lead effectively besides brute force and sheer numbers, Arthas and his Death Knight side obliterated Ner'zhul's soul and then fused together to lead the Scourge to greatness. So Arthas still kept his love of Jaina and one other, while his Death Knight side held love for 2 specific women also, and their combined mind wanted another specific woman. One such woman happened to be none other than Sylvanas Windrunner, whom he convinced when he showed that her younger sister had actually willingly joined Arthas and was not killed by him like Sylvanas had been led to believe by the former king of her people. You see, Sylvanas had known her people were becoming corrupt and were even planning on breaking their alliance with the humans and such to expand their borders, while thinking that they were invincible with the Sunwell's power at their command. Then Arthas attacked, and the only reason she had fought back instead of fleeing with the good elves, as she felt the Sunwell was more of a curse than an asset, was because she was told that Arthas had butchered her sisters, which was now known to be a lie, as Verisa had joined him willingly, and Illyria, her older sister that is not an OC, had apparently been killed near Silvermoon while Arthas was still fighting at the first Elf Gate. Arthas then found her corpse and felt the rage of her spirit and turned her into a banshee that happened to be Sylvanas's right-hand woman. Of course, now you're all wondering, well, how the heck does that possibly translate to either of them having feelings for the other? Well, Arthas was intimate with her throughout her service between him converting her and Illidan attacking the Frozen Throne, but had never actually ordered her to be with him or to enjoy their time, and the only reason she would have denied it was because of her hatred for him. Now that the reason for her hatred was gone, and the fact that she had met him a few times in his younger years. Arthas stated in the game that he had been to Quel'Thalas before. She was willing to attempt a relationship and she became the second queen 2 years after Naruto had been saved by Arthas, and both she and Jaina took a shine to the boy rather quickly and aided in his training and schooling. Now, since Sylvanas was no longer keeping Arthas's control from reaching her soldiers and Naruto, Kyuubi had actually been able to restore his control to what it was before Illidan attacked the Frozen Throne. Arthas retook control of the Forsaken. He immediately began restructuring them to be more effective while also ordering the Forsaken to remain like they were still the Horde's allies until he was ready to strike. The shocking part was that most of those who could have resisted and even freed themselves and others from Arthas' control didn't and seemed to be content to serve Arthas again. Back to Naruto, he had grown in the past 6 years and had not changed much as Arthas decided to wait until his body was at its peak before he would give Naruto powers of the undead. Arthas had told him of his birth parents, his heritage, and the crimes of Konoha had committed a year ago, and the results were surprising as power had exploded from Naruto in a fury. However, the truly shocking thing was it was not demonic in nature, and Kyuubi even confirmed that the power was all Naruto. Apparently, Naruto's chakra network had given him a massive amount of mana when he came to this world, and he could utilize both chakra and mana without one affecting the other. They were also pleasantly surprised to find that combining the two forces created attacks that were on par with an Archmage's power, as chakra was wild, a force of nature, and untamed, while mana was controlled, flowing, and directed. Here and now though, Naruto was now able to get the jumpstart from Kyuubi and was currently standing in an open fjord with his torso bare and him standing in a meditative pose. While they would deny it to anyone, those gathered, the 4 rescuers, the other commanders, and the queens, were all worried about this, as he was informed that if he and Kyuubi were not careful, then he could potentially die. Naruto opened an eye and smiled at his family, while the look in his eye promised that he was not going to die. They had already discussed this with him, and he simply stated that he was the Prince of Death, damn it. He wasn't going to let anything bring him down, let alone a power-up from a demon. The others stood away in the fjord and saw him become enshrouded by a dark red sphere of power. Incredible, such power, and this demon is restrained. This one could rival Archimonde in power alone, and then adding in this regeneration factor that Naruto has, and it could lead the Legion with little trouble. Was the thought of those gathered there before they saw the sphere slowly start to fade away and reveal a new Naruto. He stood there with the body of an 18-year-old that looked to be built for combat and rigorous training while standing at 6 feet 5 inches. His whisker marks were more defined, his fingers were claws, and he had shoulder-length blood-red hair, slitted crimson eyes with the slits being cerulean, lengthened canines, and, most shocking of all, blood-red fox ears on his head and a same-color tail swishing behind him. Luckily, the power also gave him some clothes, as he stood in a pair of red ninja pants and combat boots. While everyone was shocked, most being Kyuubi, as it had no idea what form Naruto would take afterwards, and Verisa, who was blushing up a storm at the sight of Naruto, Naruto simply grinned at them. Sorry about that. His voice was deeper now, and it served to only increase Verisa's blush. Kyuubi said that my body was still malnourished and damaged from the first 4 years and would have taken a few years to restore perfectly, so it had to jumpstart my body even harder, and even offered to age me to what I would be at 18 to allow myself to take more punishment in training and learn faster. I'm still mentally a 10-year-old, but can process like an 18-year-old and will age normally once I hit 18. For now though, I will stay like this until that time. Noticing his father looking at him strangely, Naruto turned and saw the tail. Oh, that. Yeah, Kyuubi said that I would more than likely have demon blood running through my veins from the sealing and the healing 4 years ago, and that its power would awaken my dormant side this time around. So basically, I'm now a half-breed of a human and demon with powers of both, and in addition I can access demon techniques to be even stronger. Arthas was both shocked and happy. This is good news, my son. Now that your body is prepared, I can gift you with the powers of a Death Knight, and Kel can begin training you in necromancy. Naruto smiled and nodded as he walked forward and stood before his father while Arthas's power flowed through his hands. This will hurt, my son. Naruto nodded, and Arthas thrust his hands into Naruto's chest, who screamed out in pain as more power exploded from him and actually forced Arthas back several feet. When Arthas regained his senses, he saw a pillar of white, crimson, purple, and cerulean energy swirling where Naruto stood before the colors combined into black and started condensing into a figure before they saw the brand new Naruto. His body was the same as before except now his hair, ears, and tail were white. His eyes were the same form but black instead of crimson, and the slitted pupils were crimson with cerulean magatama in a ring around his slitted pupil with purple rings going throughout his eyes. He held what Arthas knew as a katana, but it was double-edged, curved slightly less than usual, serrated on the back edge. At the base of the blade were dual demonic fox skulls with the canines being elongated into blades beside the main blade on both sides. Along the flat sides similar to a size, not the person, but two blades on each side, and they aren't curved. A handguard came from the base of the fox skulls to the hilt that resembled 9 intertwined tails, and the hilt was the Uzumaki spiral. Google a Templar sword and replace the endpiece with an Uzumaki swirl inside a kunai ring. The entire sword was black, the serrated edges were white, the fox skull and handguard were crimson, the spiral was cerulean, and the actual handle was purple and grooved to fit Naruto's hand, while the entire sword gave off a black glow to it, while a black sheath, with a kyubi, dragon, scorpion, and tiger were on there in crimson, cerulean, purple, and white respectively, was on his left side attached to him by a belt. On that note, the boy-man now wore a thin metal armor across his body except his head. His hands were in metal cestices, his feet were in boots. The belt seemed to be in the style of his home world as it was attached to several pockets, pouches. His legs and chest were in padded plate. A cloak with the hood pulled down was attached to his shoulders, and the whole armor was silver-colored with human skull designs on them and accents of black, crimson, purple, and white, with each color being the Uzumaki swirl emblazoned on each piece. The mark of the demons, which was a burning demonic skull, which in this case was a fox's skull as Naruto was now part fox demon. A purple ripple pattern in the eyes of the skulls, and the scourge emblem respectively. The cloak was also designed with black flames along the bottom of the cloak, a crimson imprint of Kyubi growling viciously while guarding a silver Uzumaki swirl, and white magatama surrounding Kyubi with a rippling purple pattern in the eyes of the Kyubi. All in all, both he and the blade stood as a threat to anyone who stood against them, and Arthas and Kyubi couldn't be happier. Kyubi especially, since it knew the meaning of the ripple pattern and knew it made the right choice to aid the boy. Naruto gazed at the blade, knowing it was tradition for Death Knights to name their blades, and one name echoed out to him: Death's Embrace. As he spoke those words, the sword hummed in his hand and the glow intensified as the sword seemed to accept the name. Naruto's eyes then barely glazed over for a moment before he looked towards his father and mother's. Kyubi informs me that I basically have 3 forms. One is my human form. The next is either my demon or Death Knight form, and then this one that I am in, which you could technically call my hybrid form, which is both options for Form 2 being active at once. Each one will increase my power by a factor of 2, and that will only increase as I train more, and it does not drain me to be in this state. But for now I think I will remain in my human form to allow my enemies the mistake of underestimating me. He decreased his power slightly and his eyes remained black with the slits going cerulean, his hair stayed white, the whisker marks diminished, and his tail, claws, and ears vanished. All in all he appeared like a white-haired teenager with black eyes. He then decreased it further and appeared as a cerulean blue-eyed, shoulder-length blonde-haired teenager with whisker marks. As for Death's Embrace, its glow diminished slightly when he reverted from his demon side, and the glow faded to a low aura when he reverted back to his human side before he sheathed the blade. Arthas smiled at his son with pride, as did Jaina and Sylvanas, though the latter also smirked at her younger sister still blushing at the blonde and actually wasn't opposed to it should they get together, as she knew Naruto would treat her sister well. Arthas walked forward and patted his son on the head. Though they were close in height now, I am proud of you, my son. Once your training has been complete, we will begin to force our enemies from our borders before we then begin marching on their homes and claim these lands. Naruto nodded. I won't fail you, father. Anyone who stands in my way will be converted or killed and converted. Let all who live tremble before the might of the scourge, he stated with a tone that told everyone that he planned to kill every mortal on this planet if he had to. Arthas smiled with pride before leading them back to the citadel to continue Naruto's training. And then? Hee. Then the march of Scourge would begin anew and the world will either submit or die and submit afterwards. Beware all who stand before the Scourge. Death rules these lands and it now comes for you. Arthas thought as he already had a proper test for his son when he was ready. Arthas sat on his throne while his son knelt before him while Kel'Thuzad was standing to the side of the area waiting for his king to need him. Beside Arthas were his loves both from before and one that he had gained 3 years ago. The woman was none other than Queen Alexstrasza of the Red Dragonflight. Now you may be curious as to how this occurred and it is rather simple in essence. You see, ever since Arthas merged with the Lich King, she had been channeling her energies to enter the plane that Arthas and his Death Knight side resided in and was working on aiding them in breaking Ner'zhul's control over them. Now, this had been going on for over a decade and they had had plenty of time to talk and get to know each other, especially because the plane's time was slower than the real world's. Over the decades, on the plane's time, they had grown from animosity to respect to friendly, to flirting, to budding romance, and finally to love and wanting to be together. The only reason they had not been together when Arthas awakened, meaning when he killed Ner'zhul, not when Ner'zhul awoke and began a new attack, was because she could not risk having to fight the Horde and Alliance while they were so close to her borders, as no matter how powerful her flight was, even they could be overwhelmed by different forces attacking simultaneously. This was even more plausible as the Blue Dragon flight was still out of control and attacking. However, once Arthas had beaten back the Horde, Alliance, Argent Crusade, and Dalaran from her borders, she was free to be with her beloved. After marking him as her mate and the new king of the Dragon Flights, which resulted in him gaining draconic blood and powers. Now, you may now be saying, okay, that explains her, but what about her flight? They couldn't be going along with this, right? Well, if it was our people then yes, that would be a high probability, but these were beings that had served the same queen, who had never steered her people wrong, for several millennia. Don't get me wrong, there was a lot of doubt and mistrust about Arthas and that may have continued had Arthas not given up his blade and armor to show he meant nothing but respect to the dragons so long as they respected him, and even led the Scourge assault against the Blue Dragonflight to try and force Malygos to awaken from his insanity. Not surprisingly, Naruto had aided in turning the tide of opinions by swearing his service for 2 years to the flight and swearing an oath under magic that his father would never harm the dragons without just cause. Naturally, his family was worried for him as a few of the less trusting dragons sent him on what could be considered suicide missions, and he had gained some reminders of the tasks he had to do to prove his worth, but he had come out successful and battle-hardened while gaining the respect of the few remaining flights and even admiration of the bronze dragons. Of course, this became a large shock to the Horde, Dalaran, Alliance, and the Argent Crusade when the dragons did raids on their positions, thereby forcing them farther back. Back to the current area, for now. Towards the back of the area were 2 other women who were paying attention to the blonde-haired boy that was kneeling before his father. Their names were Kira and Verisa, and they thought about how Naruto had grown in the past few years. The boy, now young man, had risen to glory for the Scourge as he had surpassed all other Death Knights, Necromancers, Shadowhunters, and most Shadowmancer recruits in skill and ability. True to Kyuubi's word, Naruto had not aged at all and his body was in top physical condition. The only change being his hair turned black, which they assumed had to do with his powers maturing along with him. If anything, his body had only filled out more with muscles and a few scars too. Now you may believe that scars were not possible for Naruto because Kyuubi healed his body. Well, you would be right, on most occasions. However, to ensure Naruto earned his skills and ranks to the best of his ability, both Kyuubi and Arthas had decided that he would not have access to his healing abilities during training exercises and his assignments that were designed to test him, and he had even blocked the powers himself when he served the dragon flight of his third mother, who had taken to him rather quickly and began training him in advanced magical arts. Speaking of his mother, he and Kyuubi actually found a way to call forth her soul and then bound it to his blade upon her request, and she had even helped him in gaining his Uzumaki clan heritage of seals and swordsmanship. Speaking of seals, he had also managed to pry his birth father's soul from his seal and put it into his blade as well, which from the sounds Naruto could hear, his father was getting a pummeling from his wife for what had happened to their son since the sealing. They had been able to stay with him, in spirit. I made a funny, for 2 years before they were absorbed by the blade completely, or at least their knowledge was. Apparently his sword was semi-sentient and knew his desires, so it released the souls into the afterlife when he had gained all the knowledge from them possible. Of course his mother, being how she was, made him swear on his life that he would grant her lots of grandchildren and to love any women he picked with all of his heart. He of course agreed, though he was blushing a bit from his mother's ranting about grandchildren. In addition to growing in power, Naruto had pushed the Scourge to victory beyond what they had gained in the first 5 years that he was with them. Besides gaining the remaining Dragonflight's allegiance, he had also used his new sealing knowledge to improve 2 professions Azeroth had that were known as rune crafting and rune forging. He had developed new runes, based on his sealing knowledge, and made them take less than half the space they took before, and even fixed the flaw in the rune blades that limited them to only 1 rune being active at one time. He personally had 10 runes as his sword doubled as both a one-handed and a two-handed weapon, which gave him a distinct edge. They were: Cinder Glacier, increases the damage of his spells that deal frost or shadow damage. Razorish, causes frost damage and increases vulnerability to frost attacks when a blow was dealt. Spellbreaking and Spell Shattering, deflects a portion of all spell damage back on the attacker, which he found worked for jutsu as well. Lickbane, adds fire damage and deals more damage to undead targets. Fallen Crusader, has a chance to heal and increase total strength for a limited time for each kill. Stoneskin Gargoyle and Nerubian Carapace, improved armor and stamina. Lastly, the runes of Sword Breaking and Sword Shattering, increases reaction time, thereby increasing chances that a parry of an attack would occur and increases the likelihood that disarming efforts will not work on the user. Needless to say, he only increased the deadliness, no pun intended, of his fellow Death Knights. Though from the conversations both the girls and he had heard amongst the ranks, his family, and his allies, he was being called a demonic knight as his new class. They honestly thought the name fit him as he was a demon and a knight and both dealt in death in major portions. He took the name in stride, and all 4 factions of his enemies had bounties of over 100 gold pieces for the head of the Black Demon Knight, the Demon Prince of Death, the Lich Knight, and the Death Demon. Each one held his general description, and he found it amusing that not one of these factions had seen him go to the next level of power, as none had proven to be effective enough to take him on and push him into his demon or DK form, let alone his hybrid form. Another change that he had made was releasing Kyuubi without killing himself through his sealing skills, and he was pleasantly surprised that Kyuubi was a girl named Kira and they had gotten along well during the past few years. Especially through having to endure the teasing from Arthas and his wives that Naruto and Kira were going to become closer than they were. This was only more evident when Kira would blush when Naruto fought in his other forms, which may be why she was friends with Verisa, as they both had to endure the teasing and embarrassment when they both blushed when they saw him like that. However, despite the looks he possessed, he was still young and he had already told his father and mothers he would not be considering courting for a few more years. They also discovered that because of the seal, regardless of if Kira was out or not, they were mentally connected. This was both a blessing and a curse, as when one was teased by the adults, the other would know and get the blush as well. Back on task though, Naruto had utilized his abilities by fighting and killing various leading members or destroying positions of the enemy war effort. Including, but not limited to, destroying their flying bases with Kira by using lightning and fire styles to cause mass damage. He even went toe-to-toe with Tyrion Fordrain, leader of the Argent Crusade, and Darien Mograine, leader of the Knights of the Ebonblade, on separate occasions of course, before they retreated from their positions. However, he had gained 2 large reminders of those battles, as he was able to go toe-to-toe, but not defeat them, as they had years of experience over him. Of course, had he gone up a form, then he probably would have been on pure equal footing despite their experience over him. Now, thanks to his efforts, the only occupied areas of Northrend that remained were Borean Tundra and the Howling Fjord. Now don't get me wrong, they are still trying to end the Nerubian rebels that existed in Zuldrak. However, they had to be careful not to awaken more of the Faceless Ones, as that would have caused further problems. Naturally though, some of the battles were hard to pull off, as they had to fight the Forsaken, make it look real, and not kill them as they served Arthas. Anyway, at the here and now, as stated before, Naruto was currently kneeling before his father in his normal form with a new kind of armor on him, as Arthas had managed to recreate the armor of his son's DK side, and while the armor he created was not as strong as his son's, nor gave off the same death-like feeling, it was still stronger and more flexible than any other armor in existence. Naruto's new armor was a pure black version of his DK armor but with crimson fox skulls that were burning in a silver flame with the rippled rings in the eyes and the Uzumaki swirls carved into the skulls with his sword strapped to his back under his cloak with the hilt sticking out of the top of the cloak behind the hood, and Naruto could wear his actual armor when he changed forms. Arthas was very pleased with his son's progress, talents, and knack for finding, creating, or gaining anything and anyone that would be useful to have on one side, and said, "Man, demigod, try to deny he isn't." Before Arthas took the Lich King throne, he defeated a demonic Illidan Stormrage in single combat without being injured. Now he has the powers of the Lich King and dragon blood in him, stared down at his son with intrigue while the others in the room were giving the same looks as well. "What is it that you need, my son?" Arthas asked as he had never had his son kneel before him before, as Naruto had proven to be the perfect student, apprentice, successor and was to not kneel to anyone. This of course is what made everyone intrigued, as Naruto had shown his willingness to never kneel or bow to anyone, yet here he was kneeling before Arthas. Naruto took a breath before speaking. "I wish to travel to my home world for a few days." This caught everyone by surprise and they wondered what he could possibly want from there. Seeing his father's questioning gaze, he elaborated, "My birth mother, before she passed to the next world, managed to help me concoct a seal, which combined with my necromancy powers, allows me to summon forth other Uzumaki, or they may contact me if the need arises." Arthas nodded, understanding so far, while both he and the audience were intrigued by the seal's capabilities. "A short while ago, my mother's elder sister Fuso, actual Uzumaki that never had family listed beyond a husband and son, so I am making her Kushina's sister as neither had siblings that we are aware of, so it may be possible, contacted me, and apparently, I have an uncle living in what is called Rain Country and he is in danger." This got shocked looks from everyone, as they had thought that most, if not all, Uzumakis were wiped out and what, if any, were still alive were scattered across the world. Arthas leaned forward. "And you wish to go, find him, and save him, correct?" Arthas asked, as he would not be surprised by such an act by his son. Naruto nodded. "Yes, not only would I have another family member to continue my clan's lineage, but my aunt also informed me that he has the same eyes that I do." This got further shocked looks, as Naruto had unlocked his Rinnegan during a fight with Malagos a few years ago when said dragon launched an attack on Wormacrest Temple and Naruto nearly lost Verisa because she was visiting him at the time. His fury made him activated and he then blasted Malagos back with an attack that Kira recalled as Shinra Tensai. The amount of power had drained him and he subsequently collapsed, but he got the satisfaction of knowing that he blasted the dragon back over a mile away, which gave the dragons under his third mother's command time to mount a defense. "Not only would I gain a teacher and more family, but it also gives me a chance to test myself against warriors of my world," Naruto stated, as he knew he would never disobey his father, but the temptation to do so was always there. Arthas sat there in silence for a minute before he turned and saw Sylvanas had placed a hand on his shoulder before nodding towards him. Arthas reciprocated the nod before turning back to his son. "Very well, you have my permission to go. However, you must know that time passes faster here than it does there. We are unsure of the exact time difference, but we suspect that it is rather weighted towards our side of the realms," he stated as he gazed at the man that had become important to him. Naruto nodded. "So while I may have been here for nearly 14 years, it could have been anywhere from 1 year to maybe 8+ years there, depending on the exchange." Arthas nodded towards him. "I understand, father. I will leave at once and return successful," Naruto stated in a matter-of-fact tone that left no argument that he would succeed. Arthas smiled with pride at his son. "Kel, get a portal ready to the area we researched as Rain Country." Arthas commanded, as he had requested Kira to give them a detailed map of the elemental countries, as she had known it, so if they ever did need to portal there, then they knew the exact locations to go in relation to the portal they used in Konoha. The Lich prepared to do just that, while Arthas walked up to Naruto and gave him a black stone with a glowing green rune on it. "This Hearthstone will recall you, and anyone with you, back to Ice Crown Citadel. We believe that it will work even in the other realm as it works in Outland." Naruto nodded and embraced his father before giving his 3 mothers a farewell hug each and, for his own personal amusement and desire, gave Verisa and Kira a peck on the cheek. Naturally, both blushed brightly while the others found amusement in the act. "I said I wouldn't court anyone yet." I never said I wouldn't flirt," Naruto stated before going through the portal. Both Kira and Verisa blushed harder at the thought of more flirting in the future, as both knew that his demon side would make him very dominant if he courted them. Not that they minded that idea in the least. Elemental countries. Rain country. Unknown exact location, time, and year. Naruto stepped out into a rocky area that was currently in the middle of a rainstorm. Guess this is why it's called Rain Country. Now the question is, which way do I go? Naruto thought to himself as he focused out with his senses, as his mother had informed him that all Uzumaki had some sensor abilities in one form or another. He felt a large group of chakra signatures in one direction, and they were heading towards two other signatures, and from what he could sense, thanks to Kira giving him the ability to sense negative emotions, one member of the group was scared. Taking a black skull mask with crimson eyes and the Scourge's emblem engraved on the forehead, Naruto placed it on his face before pulling the hood of his cloak over his head and taking off towards the location. He arrived in time to find a battalion of ninja with a blue-haired young woman bound and being held hostage by a tall man wearing a breather and headplate like his family member, the second Hokage, while an older man with one eye and dressed in Anbu gear stood beside him. They were Hanzo the Salamander of Omegakure and Danzo the Warhawk of Konoha, and they stood atop a cliff facing two figures. One red-haired with the Rinnegan and one orange-haired, and both wearing a cloak with red clouds on it. "You with the red hair, kill your friend and the girl will be spared," shouted Hanzo just before his danger senses kicked in and told him to move. He jumped just as a glowing green skull flew past his previous position and hit one of his soldiers before the man dropped to the ground dead, with a look of horror plastered on his face. Before anyone could react, a man dressed in black armor with designs of crimson fox skulls ignited in silver flames, with purple rippled eyes, and a spiral engraved on the forehead appeared, grabbed the girl, and was down next to the other two before anyone knew what happened. Naruto cut the girl, young woman, free and turned towards the cliff in an uncaring attitude. "I have a better idea. How about you leave before I crush you in your soul?" Naruto stated as he stood there while mentally counting the number of thralls he would obtain for his father if he killed the battalion. Hanzo was pissed at this person for interfering, as was Danzo, as not only had he got the girl back, but now they had to risk soldiers to kill the three, and now this new person. "Who the hell are you? You have no right to interfere in our village's affairs," Hanzo yelled down in fury, while Danzo was no better, but was better at hiding his emotions. Naruto smirked and then flipped them off. "None of your business. I don't serve you or anyone, so I have the right to do as I please." Naruto then channeled some chakra, shadow clone jutsu. 10 copies of himself appeared and they rushed at the enemy, who were shocked at a Konoha Jonin level technique being used with no seals, and started fighting the enemy while Naruto stayed by the three. "Don't worry, I'm here to help you." "Who are you?" the red-haired man asked as he felt something from the person in front of him and was erring on the side of caution. Naruto sighed before stating, "Your cousin." This got shocked looks from the three before Naruto drew Death's Embrace and blocked sword attack from Danzo. "You're looking for trouble, old man. Especially after what you did to my birth mother." This got 4 shocked looks before Naruto slammed his boot into Danzo, sending him crashing into the cliff face. Naruto turned back to the top of the cliff when he felt a surge of chakra and saw Hanzo there with a giant salamander and had just smashed 4 of his clones, but the corpses at his disposal were more than enough as his clones had destroyed the ranks of the battalion with 5 to 8 kills apiece. Naruto raised his blade into the air and a black aura shot out and flooded the corpses before they rose up and started attacking the remaining ninja and Hanzo. Of course, the sight of corpses rising had scared and shocked the remaining ninja, even the emotionless members of Danzo's route, and some fled while Hanzo bisected the walking corpses. However, he discovered too late that the corpses would just rise again, after pulling themselves back together. He was forced to block with his scythe as Naruto crashed into him from the side with his sword poised to take his head off. Hanzo was pushed off his salamander, which didn't remain long as Naruto beheaded it before charging Hanzo again. They locked weapons and Hanzo was shocked that he was being matched this easily. To be fair, the real Naruto fought Pain and won, and since Pain defeated Hanzo, it is not that outrageous, and it is clearly stated on the official site that Hanzo grew complacent and comfortable in his power after the Second War, so it isn't wrong to think that maybe he didn't keep in the best of shape. Personally, I feel my Naruto is stronger and more badass than the real one. You're supposed to be the legendary Hanzo, leader of AIM, survivor of 2 ninja wars, has the black salamander's venom in his veins, and the one who gave the Sannin their title. I am unimpressed, Naruto stated before he pivoted and cut open Hanzo's right side. In the same motion, he shoved his hand in and ripped out the venom sac of the salamander. Naruto examined the sac with a critical eye, while ignoring his screaming and writhing opponent on the ground. Interesting, this will aid my father's army greatly. Thank you for your contribution to our cause, Naruto said, to no one in particular, as Hanzo too busy was screaming in pain and his remaining troops were grabbing him and hightailing it out of there while Danzo disappeared during the fighting. Naruto sealed the sack away, sheathed his sword, and turned towards the 3 who were looking at him impressed and awed. He walked forward removing his hood and mask, after sensing no other ninja within a mile's radius of him. The 3 now looked over the black-haired, slitted cerulean-eyed, whisker-marked cheek, teenager outfitted in strange armor. Naruto stood before the redhead and stuck his hand out. Amon Manethil, formerly Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, biological son to Kushina, Red Death, Uzumaki and Minato, Yellow Flash, Namikaze. The 3 widened their eyes at the names before Nagato took Naruto's hand and shook it. Nagato, though I suppose my last name is Uzumaki if what you say about us is true, he stated while his friends were ready to strike should Naruto prove to be a threat. Naruto nodded. It is. Your mother, Fuso, was my mother's older sister. When Whirlpool fell, many Uzumaki scattered and were unaware of any other living Uzumaki. The only way I knew of you was because of some skills and abilities that I gained from my adoptive father, which allow me to communicate with the dead. This got surprised looks. They would have been shocked if not for the still-moving corpses that were behind Naruto. If that is not enough, then there is this. He closed his eyes before opening them, which revealed the Rinnegan. This, of course, shocked them. I came to offer you sanctuary with my adoptive father. We are currently working on uniting his world under his banner and I was hoping to keep any biological family I had left alive. The 3 looked at each other with uncertainty. You do not have to stay indefinitely, if you are concerned about abandoning your village. Of course, my father won't give you sanctuary for free, but will not demand your life in exchange for your services. You may return here if you so wish at any time. Nagato looked towards his friends and they nodded as they had lost all their comrades and staying in AIM was not an option as they were outgunned now and were probably going to be labeled terrorists or rebels. We will come with you cousin, but we do wish to return here at some point to end Hanzo and perhaps your father can give us some aid in achieving peace in this world. Naruto nodded before he turned to the cliff again, more specifically to the trees on the far right. Without a word he returned his hood and mask, leapt up the cliff, and moved into the forest, while the 3 followed him and the resurrected soldiers trudged up the long way. He came upon a scene of a young girl running with a loaf of bread from a group of people with weapons. The girl then tripped and scrambled back to a tree while shaking in fear as the group approached her, brandishing weapons. Knowing the girl shouldn't be harmed for trying to survive, Naruto leapt in front of her and, in a flash of black, decapitated the group in one swing. He moved to the girl who was shaking in fear and Naruto removed his mask. Are you alright? He asked as the girl looked at him with some fear. Yes, thank you. She then shivered slightly and teared up a little, but, I don't know what to do now. My family is gone and my village either treats me like a pest or as something they don't want to have anything to do with. She hugged her legs to her chest and cried slightly. She stopped abruptly when a hand was placed on her shoulder. She looked to see Naruto smiling softly at her. What's your name? He asked softly to her with a kind smile. She took a few breaths before speaking. Kin. My name is Kin, mister? Naruto smiled. Amon Manethil, would you like to come with me, Kin? He asked with a smile, while the 4 individuals were shocked. I was treated similar and worse in my village before my father found me and took me in. My father would not mind if you came, though you will have to work hard afterwards. Would you like to leave here and come with me? He stated before having to brace himself for the response. Kin stared with wide eyes at Naruto before she nearly tackled him in a hug. Thank you. Thank you. Take me with you, please. Please get me out of here. I don't want to go back there. She said through tears of joy. Naruto chuckled and patted her back before he stood, sealed the new minions, and had the others place hands on his shoulder before he took out the hearthstone and it glowed brightly before they vanished. 4 years, Azeroth time, later, the Frozen Throne. The past few years had been good to Naruto and his family. Arthas had welcomed the newcomers to his kingdom under the condition that, should the need arise, they would aid his forces in combat, which was readily agreed to. Sylvanas's apothecaries were delighted as they began to study and use the venom sac that was taken from Hanzo in their own brands of poisons, which only became more potent and allowed for airborne warfare. Nagato had been training Naruto in the powers of the Rinnegan, and both were experimenting for the powers that neither one knew about, though Naruto's was considered stronger from his other 3 types of power affecting and changing it. Konan and Yahiko had officially become a couple and were discussing a wedding date for when the land was not at war anymore, or both just got fed up with waiting. Naruto had officially begun to court Kira and Verisa, much to the girl's enjoyment and slight pleasure, as they had informed him that they weren't against a grope here and there, which he was perfectly happy to oblige. Kin had become a little sister to Naruto, while Konan and Yahiko had become like an aunt and uncle to him and parents to Kin. Kin had trained hard and was becoming adept with throwing weapons and shadow hunter skills. Naruto's power had only grown, and if Arthas had to guess, then he would say that Naruto now equaled him when he faced Illidan's Stormrage at the Frozen Throne, while in his base form, as Naruto had never gone all out in his demon, DK, or hybrid form. On another note, the entire continent of Northrend was free of the Horde, Alliance, Argent Crusade, and the Wizards of Dalaran. Naturally, the factions dug into their last area that they possessed a foothold in. Dalaran especially was stubborn, until both Naruto and Nagato blasted the city with twin Shinra Tensais, which forced the leaders to warp the city away before it was torn apart. The Nerubians had been both recruited and defeated because when Alexstrasza joined Arthas, it caused a ripple effect in their ranks and a small civil war broke out. Many Nerubians believed that joining Arthas would grant them access to their kingdom again and prosperity, as serving him was better than extinction, and perhaps Anubarak was right to side with the Lich King. While many still held that he was not to be trusted, and they were vehemently arguing, fighting back. Naturally, Naruto led a squad of soldiers to aid the first group, which was a test to show his leadership skills. He proved himself yet again, and even more so when the second group of Nerubians decided that Arthas would never have their homes and released the faceless ones out of their makeshift prison of being buried beneath the earth. Naruto ordered an evacuation and held the hordes back for 4 hours before reinforcements arrived and were able to help him push them back and then seal them away again. For his success and duty, his father rewarded him with a pair of pistols that his soldiers had been experimenting with by using runes and seals that actually drew on his power and unleashed the attacks accordingly depending on which energy he used and the amount used. They were both pure black in the form of skeletal dragons whose maws were the barrel with putrid purple eyes in the heads. The hammers were bat-like bone wains. The hilts were dragon bone claws that held black crystals that had a silver swirling glow within, and 9 tails came up to form the triggers and guards. Across the entire length of the pistols were black, silver, cerulean, crimson, white, and putrid purple runes and seals. The idea for them came from Sylvanas, as she knew Naruto tried his hardest with a bow and was decent in it, but he was more situated to guns. Which Sylvanas didn't mind at all, as that was the only slight downside of Naruto for her. However, having a son whose only flaw was that he wasn't excellent in skill with a bow was completely fine with her. The same could be said for Jaina and Alexstrasza, with the former being happy to have a young man that was an attentive student for magical arts, even if he favored pure combat like his father, as Naruto happened to be a prodigy for learning techniques and theories that normally would take years to master, even with his shadow clones. While his battle skills were better than his magic skills, he was still by far greatly skilled in magic, which Kira theorized was because of his monstrous reserves of human chakra being converted into mana. Then you had to add in his demonic chakra and mana, and his Death Knight powers. Put it all together and you have a young man with Archmage-level powers who is still growing. Alexstrasza was happy to have such a bundle of energy and optimism to teach dragon forms of combat, which led them to the discovery that the Sage of Six Paths did grant something to the Uzumaki clan, his third descendant's clan, as the Jubi was apparently a corrupted aspect like Deathwing was, and the sage gave some of Jubi's power to his third descendant, which in turn made them lower-level dragonkin, and over time the DNA and power was watered down and became dormant. However, Naruto's arrival in this world, plus his power converting to mana, had unleashed the suppressed genes. Then those genes took in the added power of his Death Knight and Demon sides and he was almost at a full-powered dragon and was almost a fully matured dragonkin. So now Naruto was a human, demon, undead, and dragonkin formed into one being, which was unheard of for the world of Azeroth. Alexstrasza was happy about his development as it gave her a feeling of Naruto being her actual son and that she could actually train him in some arts. However, she did not know what type of dragon blood was held within Naruto as he had to reach full maturity for the blood to take full effect and even then she could only speculate as no dragon had held undead or demon powers within them, let alone both. Needless to say, Arthas and the rest of their family group were anticipating Naruto unlocking his powers. Of course, Arthas also felt more of a connection to Naruto through the dragon's blood as they now had another thing in common and he was only getting more proud of his son and was thanking the gods, even if he hated them at times and had every right to, for allowing him to have Naruto as a son. At present, Naruto stood before his father now showing signs of aging again as he was approaching his 23rd birthday and Kyuubi's power only stopped him from aging until 18. He still wore the same armor as before and appeared the same except for his hair being longer and made into a small ponytail in the back and two bangs framing his face. The reason he was here was because his birth mother had contacted him about a friend of hers that was in need of help and asked her son to aid her and her eldest, while also stating that her friend was a looker and Naruto should keep that in mind, as he could gain 3 strong fighters for when the need arose. So now he stood before his father while he waited for his decision on going back. Of course, Arthas was debating as he had planned to give Naruto a graduation exam of sorts to test Naruto's full progress both in Azeroth's abilities and the ninja ones he had obtained. While he wanted the test done quickly as to better prepare for their first assault on the other factions before they could remount an offensive strike to try and reclaim a landing zone, he knew Naruto would still wish to do the request as he would have someone to tell him of his mother from her childhood to adulthood and knew the boy wanted to know about his mother a little more, like the entertaining items that she may have left out when she told him about her life. So with those thoughts in mind, he sighed and nodded to his son while tossing him a hearthstone as they had taken the last one to study any effects the travel from world to world may have had and it turned out that the stone took a week to reset instead of the usual few hours. Naruto nodded towards his father and left to get ready while Arthas sighed tiredly while his loves comforted him as they knew that while the world viewed him as a heartless monster, he truly loved the young man that left as his own son. Back with Naruto, he was packing a few supplies into some storage scrolls when he felt 2 people behind him and he grinned. In a fluid motion, as the 2 people jumped him, he spun and pinned them both to the wall before taking one into a soul-searing kiss and then kissing the other with just as much passion. When he pulled back, Kira and Verisa were blushing and in a daze while his arms held them close to him. "What can I do for my beautiful ladies?" he stated with a smirk as ever since he hit his actual puberty. His demon side had made him more dominant with his girls and they were not complaining about it one bit. While Kira and Verisa were in a daze, thinking about how much they wanted more of Naruto's affection and anticipating when he would do more, but his words broke them out of their daze. "We came to see what you were doing. We heard you were going back to the elemental countries and were wondering why?" Kira spoke as she instinctively cuddled into Naruto's embrace while Verisa did the same. Naruto chuckled as he knew they wanted him to be more dominant but part of his demon side wanted to hear them actually beg for it to occur before he would actually do it. However, that didn't mean that he wouldn't have some fun with them, which was why he lowered his arms slightly before groping their asses, which caused them to squeak before moaning. "My birth mother asked me to help a friend of hers and that maybe I could gain 3 fighters from it. She also mentioned that her friend may be good mate for me." When he said that, the girls looked up at him, while still blushing from his hands. "You both know my position on that. I will love anyone who I decide to be with, equally, and I will not play favorites. You both know this and I will not explain it again every time a woman catches my interest," he stated, and they both nodded as Naruto got close to their ears and whispered, "Also, I imagine you both will need a bit of help once my more primal desires rise to the surface as I had cage-level stamina before I gained my demon, Death Knight, and dragon powers. So, I am sure you can imagine the amount of trouble you will have to deal with when the time comes." He finished before licking both of their ears. Both girls were bright red as several thoughts went through their heads before they both moaned slightly from the lick. "Now, I have to go and see if I can help out my birth mother's friend. You two behave while I am gone and you may get a reward." He stated before he released them both and left the room while both were still cherry red with the thoughts of them and him in various positions either solo, together, or with more women were rushing through their minds, while Kira missed Naruto giving a large mental smirk. Elemental countries. Land of Fire, Konoha. It was a dark night in Konoha as screams echoed out from the Uchiha district as 3 people were slaying several of their clanmates as they wanted to stop a possible coup that was directed not only at the Hokage, but also at the daimyo. The 3 were the most skilled of their clan, Itachi Uchiha age 13, Shisui Uchiha age 14, and Makoto Uchiha age 29. The latter being a woman who was forced to marry her husband Fugaku when she was 16 and had a Itachi that same year. She also had a 7-year-old named Sasuke who was currently in the academy and would not be home for another 15 minutes. While all 3 could care less about the village anymore, due to news about Naruto spreading like wildfire by Itachi, Weasel Anbu, and the other 3 Anbu that were pissed, but did not want the daimyo and then other lands to suffer from the ignorance, and they had been ordered, under penalty of death for not doing so, to wipe out the threat. Which they were simply only killing the actual fighters of the clan instead of the entire clan. Before they could continue, they stopped as a dark purple portal opened and an armored figure stepped out with a sword strapped to his back behind a cloak, 2 odd items in holders along his waist, black hair pulled back in a small ponytail and 2 bangs framing his face, blue slitted eyes, whisker marks on his cheeks, a face that held no baby fat, and a body that was lean and muscular, but not too much. Makoto blushed at the sight of him, while slightly drooling, and felt like she knew him while Itachi and Shisui were cautious about him while Itachi felt like he knew him as well. Before they could react, he had drawn, through 3 kunai, and impaled 3 other Uchiha members that were coming up behind the 3 killers. The man walked forward. I suggest we hurry before Anbu and Jonin arrive or we will be facing even larger hordes and that would be unwise. The man stated as he shifted to the right and stabbed another Uchiha that came up behind him. Once we are done, I can get us out of here. Itachi held his tanto tightly. Who are you and why should we trust you? He stated dangerously with his Sharingan activated. The man smirked. Weasel, I'm hurt. It's only been a few years, for you anyways, and yet you have already forgotten the boy you protected when the old geezer allowed you to. This got Itachi to show a face of shock and to stiffen. Nice to see you face to face, Itachi. Though I wish this could have been when my birth mother was still alive. He then turned to Makoto. So you're Makoto Uchiha. My birth mother was not exaggerating when she said you were beautiful. He stated as he looked her up and down with lust in his eyes. Makoto blushed brightly at being called beautiful and how the man was looking at her. Thank you, but who was your mother? She asked while not being able to control her blush. Naruto smirked. Kushina Uzumaki Namikaze. He stated as the 3 of them widened their eyes. Before you ask about my appearance, it is due to the world I live in moving faster in time than here. I am almost 19 years old now and I plan on going back with or without you, so don't try to get me to stay. He spoke before spinning and blocking a katana held by Fugaku Uchiha. Hello, you old bastard. I believe I owe you quite a bit of pain for what you attempted to do to my mother. Naruto stated before spinning and slamming his heel into Fugaku's ribcage, which broke with an audible crunch, and flung him into a wall where he left an imprint. Naruto quickly made a few shadow clones and they went out across the district while Naruto walked forward and cut off Fugaku's legs and arms, hit him with a weak death coil, and then shoved his blade up to the hilt into Fugaku's chest and watched as the color drained from him and the light leave his eyes. Don't worry, until I pull the blade out, you won't die. He stated as his eyes held rage towards him. The 3 attackers were surprised at the swordsmanship Naruto displayed while Makoto had an eyebrow twitching as she wondered what Fugaku did to Kushina. What did he do? She asked in a voice that promised pain. Naruto turned towards her, tried to force himself on her and take her as his before he married you. Then he made a deal with the one who released Kyuubi on the night of my birth, that he would help if he got to keep my mother as a pet to use as he pleased. However, that was messed up by Danzo Shimura killing my mother while she was in the hospital after Kyuubi was released. Naruto spoke and 3 large killing intents hit Fugaku as Makoto was Kushina's friend. Itachi was trained by Kushina for Anbu, and Shisui was trained by Minato for Anbu. Fugaku spit up some blood that was clearly darker than normal. Bastard. That woman should have just submitted and been a good little pet. I was the Uchiha clan head, she should have been mine. Oh, the things I would have. He was cut off by Naruto gripping his sword and turning it sharply before tearing it straight up and out and then sheathing the blade in one quick motion. Naruto then turned and threw his sword at a figure behind him, who the three Uchihas recognized as Fugaku's father Saran Uchiha. OC name as Fugaku's father is never mentioned. Naruto walked up and stabbed a kunai through his hands, knees, elbows, shoulders, and feet. He then took his sword and smirked evilly at the old man. Don't think I forgot about you setting me on fire a month before I disappeared from here, old man. Now, I'm going to return the favor. Naruto flashed through hand signs faster than their Sharingans could follow, fire style, soul-searing flames. He called out as pure white flames leapt on the man and began eating away at him. Naruto sheathed his sword and walked over to the other three. My clones have dispelled and informed me that they have eliminated every combat member of the clan. What will you do now? You can stay in this world and be on the run as the village will send Hunter Nin after you, or you can come with me to my father's world, where you will have to help in the war effort, but beyond that you will be safe. Naruto stated as he leaned against the building before perking up. Decide quickly, there is a boy on his way here and he seems to be in a hurry. Just as he said that, Makoto's youngest came around the corner before freezing when he saw his father and grandfather dead and his mother and brother standing by an armored figure. What happened? Nissan, mother, Shisui, what happened here? Who did this? Itachi sighed before disappearing and slamming Sasuke into a wall. We did this, little brother. Sasuke's eyes widened in horror and shock. We are tired of weaklings having Uchiha blood within them and calling themselves warriors when they are not. So we killed all the military members and left the civilians as they don't boast about the Uchiha power. However, we aren't going to kill you as you may have potential to be a strong warrior. So we want you to hate us and grow into a true Uchiha, then, when you are one, you can face us. With that he knocked out and dropped him on the ground. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the reason, but left it alone as it wasn't his business and stopped leaning on the wall when the three turned towards him. So? Where will you go? The three looked at each other and then nodded towards him. He nodded back and had the two males place a hand on his shoulder, while he took Makoto's hand and kissed it, which caused her to blush, and then used the Hearthstone to vanish just before Anbu and the third arrived. Ice Crown Citadel, 3 weeks later. In the past week the three Uchihas had adapted to life in Azeroth and had become acquaintances with Nagato, Konan, and Yahiko. While everyone found it amusing when Kin almost knocked Naruto over in a hug when he got back while she was shouting Nissan. Arthas, of course, allowed them to stay as long as they aided when needed, and all three helped Naruto in ninja arts as all three were in Anbu before leaving. They were of course shocked to meet Kira in the flesh, and Makoto had to deal with some teasing from her and Verisa when they both caught her with a blush that made her look like a tomato when she first saw Naruto in his hybrid form during one of his training sessions, and it only got worse. The blushing and teasing, when Naruto stated that if she wished, he would court her. Currently, Naruto stood on one of the outlooks of the frozen throne with his father standing before him and his created family to the side. You have done well, my son. Now is your final test to prove yourself worthy of generalship of my army and heir to the throne of the Lich King. Naruto stood straighter with a look of determination in his eyes that promised he would succeed no matter what he faced. Arthas smiled slightly at his son's look before he approached him with a scroll. This scroll contains the information on your objectives. Return here after completing your objectives to prepare for the rest as you require to. However, you may not receive any aid in accomplishing your goals from any Scourge or Dragon member, and you may not take the easy route of teleporting to an area near your objectives. You will have to reach there on your own. He stated, and Naruto nodded. Be warned, my son. I have chosen items that will force you to fight, infiltrate, and eliminate some of the hardest targets in the worlds. Do not get overconfident and be vigilant, for it may save your life. Arthas stated, and Naruto nodded again. Yes, father. I will not fail and will not let anyone or thing stand in my way. He stated, and Arthas smiled and nodded before he did something that shocked a few. Arthas approached and embraced his son before patting his shoulder. Bring death to your enemies, my son. Arthas stated before stepping back to allow his wives to give their farewells, which they did by hugging him and giving a kiss to his forehead or cheek. Nagato, Konan, Yahiko, and Kin came next, with the two men patting him on the back while Konan kissed his cheek and Kin gave him a hug and told him to be safe. Naruto returned the hug and told her to train hard while he was away before Itachi and Shisui came and shook his hand while nodding before they left. Makoto came up and gave Naruto a kiss to the cheek before blushing and leaving the area with Naruto smirking behind her. The area was now clear except for Naruto, Verisa, and Kira as the others wanted to give Naruto and his future mate some private time. Naruto turned around to address them before he caught Kira by her ass as she grabbed his face and started inserting her tongue into his mouth. Naruto mentally smirked before he started dominating the kiss until he was pulled to Verisa while Kira started kissing his neck. Naruto shifted one hand and held Kira with it while he pulled Verisa flush to him and started groping her ass as well. Both girls moaned into their three-way makeout session as the girls had been wanting Naruto to do more with them for a while now, but he had always stopped just shy of them getting to where they wanted. Well, now they were going to show how much they wanted it. Naruto then went back to kissing Kira before he dominated her mouth with his tongue and then moved and did the same thing with Verisa. After about 5 minutes, they broke apart with the girls being flushed and had lust and desire in their eyes as they gazed at him. Well, that was fun. He stated as Kira started standing and both snuggled into his chest, "I'll be fine, you too. Not only will I not be insulted by being brought down by an unworthy opponent, but even if I were to die, I would claw my way back from hell itself to have my vengeance on the one who dared to take me away from you too." He stated while giving both girls a kiss to the forehead which caused them to sigh contentedly and blush, while both couldn't believe how easily they had fallen for the blonde man who had them in his arms, but they weren't complaining. Just the opposite, they wanted him to do more but also knew he wanted them to admit it as a sign that they were ready to be his and no one else's. Which they were perfectly fine with, they just wanted to see if he would try to speed up the process. Kira then looked at him, "We know, Naruto-kun, but we still worry. Just as your father and mothers do even if they are skilled at hiding it." Kira stated and Verisa nodded, "Sylvanas, I can read like a book and she is scared for you as there are powers out in the world and outland that you can't take on and we are afraid that whatever Lord Arthas has planned for you will lead you to one of those entities." She stated before kissing his cheek and holding him tighter, which Kira reciprocated. Naruto smiled and hugged them tight. "I know, but nothing will bring me down." He stated before he smirked, "Besides, I haven't even marked you two as my mates yet." He stated and they both shot up and looked at him with massive blushes on their faces as demons mark their mates by biting their necks after mating, and Naruto apparently was planning on doing that. Kira then spoke up, When were you going to do that?" She asked as she stuttered since her mind was going through several scenarios as was Verisa's. Naruto smirked, "After the test was complete." "Why? Did you not want me to mark you?" He didn't even have time to blink before he was on his back with Verisa and Kira kissing him like mad before they pulled back with tears in their eyes. "Of course I want you to mark me. I love you, Naruto-kun." Kira stated while Verisa was nodding as well, "Yes, Naruto-kun. I have wanted you to mark me since I found out I wouldn't outlive you." Verisa stated before they both squeaked as Naruto flipped them over and started kissing them again. After a few minutes, he broke apart for air. "After the test, my loves. I will claim you after the test," he stated as his fangs were showing and he breathed in their scent before he pulled back and they saw his eyes were red with the cerulean slits. They shivered under the predatory gaze he gave them before he got up along with them and kissed them goodbye before he examined the scroll his father gave him and noticed the handwriting was different from his father's and realized he must have had Kel write it out. "Ammon Menethil, Prince of Death. These tasks are to completed in any order you deem fit and are to be completed to the best of your ability. Each objective comes with at least one secondary objective that, while not needed to be complete, is beneficial to your father and or the scourge, which by extension means your father if completed. Each completed objective must have some form of proof to be considered complete. Also, should you gain any allies along the way, they are the only aid you may have besides a form of transportation that you need to get from area to area. 1. Rescue Maev's Shadow Song from Illidan Stormrage's fortress. Secondary objectives. 1. Kill Illidan Stormrage, only if the opportunity presents itself. 2. Kill Lady Vosh. 3. Kill Kel'Thas Sunstrider. And 4. Kill Akama of the Draenei. 2. Bring word of Arthas Menethil's survival to Queen Tiffinalarian Rin. Secondary objectives. 1. Kill Varian Rin. 2. Get Tiffinalarian Rin out of Stormwind into the Frozen Throne. 3. Get word to Tyrande Whisperwind that Ner'zhul is dead. Secondary objectives. 1. Kill Fandral Staghelm. 2. Give Tyrande Whisperwind a way to get to Icecrown. 4. Kill Scarlet Crusade leaders. Grand Crusader Saidan Dathrahan in the Scarlet Bastion within Stratholme. High Lord Talon Fordrain in Mardenhold Keep in the Western Plaguelands. Bridget Abandes in Tyr's Hand in the Eastern Plaguelands. Crusader Lord Valdelmar in Tyr's Hand in the Eastern Plaguelands. Demetria patrolling the Eastern Plaguelands. Grand Inquisitor Isilian patrolling the Western Plaguelands. And Renaud Maugraine within the Crusaders' Cathedral at the Scarlet Monastery. Secondary objectives. 1. Destroy the Scarlet Monastery. 2. Bring as many Scarlet Bands as possible. Any less than 100 will be disappointing. 3. Gather any and all information on Scarlet Crusader placements and agents. 4. Find information on what happened to Sally Whitemane. 5. Find Grommash Hellscream's axe and grave, revive him, and see if he will side with Lord Arthas. Secondary objectives. 1. Find the Pit Lord Manaroth's twin-sided sword and bring it to the Frozen Throne. 2. Ensure the Pit Lord is truly dead and is not merely biding his time to strike. 6. Kill Onyxia the matriarch of the Black Dragonflight in her den within Dustwallow Marsh. Secondary objectives. 1. Bring proof of each member of her brood you kill. 2. Bring any artifacts she may have hoarded over the centuries back to the Frozen Throne. 3. Destroy her brood down to the last egg, unless you happen to find a hatchling that has not been corrupted by her yet. 7. Kill the Dreadlord Mal'Ganis, who is posing as Barian Westwind again within the ranks of the Scarlet Crusade. He is currently located on the outskirts of Stratholme. Naruto then noticed a note added to the bottom and noticed his father added a final objective. My son, though I have been unable to do so, I want you to unlock your draconic blood in full. Such a thing to occur would not only make your mother, Alexstrasza, proud, but myself as well, and it will help solidify our alliance with the dragons. I do not wish to put the burden of trying to bring out your transformation upon you, but I know you can do it, and if you succeed, you may very well become more powerful than I wish to see that occur. While part of me desires no one ever be stronger, the father in me would be proud beyond words to see you achieve that. At the bottom of this scroll is a seal that contains 3 letters, one for Maiev Shadowsong, one for Tiffin Rin, and one for Tyrande Whisperwind. You're to give them these letters when you meet with them. Bring death to your enemies, my son. Naruto smiled at his father's concern before he pocketed the scroll and left for the armory to get outfitted in a new type of outfit that he felt honored his parentage of both worlds, and he could get some weapons that he had custom made that he believed would benefit him on his missions, because he had quite a few souls to collect and he needed to have more than just his sword and magic if he was to be prepared for any and everything. Now he just had to decide which mission he should take first. 2 months later, Tirisfal Glades, northwest of Undercity. Naruto was currently approaching the Scarlet Monastery after traveling for a month to cross the frozen plains of Northrend, the ocean, and then a part of the Eastern Kingdoms. He had chosen Renaud Maugraine as his first target to lessen the annoyance his Banshee mother was feeling from these damn zealots. He currently wore black steel-toed and sole combat boots, black armored leggings with an array of pockets, a crimson belt with a human skull belt buckle and pouches and pockets on it, while his 2 pistols were holstered there, a black muscle shirt that he had armor mesh sewn in with demon hide, over that he wore a crimson padded flak jacket with multiple pockets, on his arms were gauntlets, bracers, and pauldrons that were all metal and black in color. The left pauldron was a fox skull while the right was a dragon's, while on his leggings and boots were more skulls, and his gauntlets had the Uzumaki swirl on the backs. On his back was his sword strapped to him with a black cloak with crimson flames across the bottom with a mound of skulls and Prince of Death on the back in his world's kanji surrounding the Uzumaki swirl. Across the inside of all these things were seals and runes etched, sewn, painted onto them that Naruto himself had designed. The idea was simple: cloth, leather, and light metal armor that had the durability of plate armor. He had managed to do this through creating a specialized seal that made the armor absorb other armors into it to improve itself to protect the user. Much like his sword adapted itself to better serve him and fulfill his wishes. Now he could use his natural agility and quickness while having the durability, power, and strength of a true DK. Essentially, he planned to utilize his rogue, warrior, DK, mage, necromancer, shadow hunter, and shadowmancer skills, abilities, and fighting styles to their fullest extent. Back on task though, Naruto crept through the brush as he surveyed the monastery. He had already gained 10 scarlet headbands from a patrol and sentries he encountered, and he planned to add to his collection very quickly. This was why he placed a black blank face mask over his face and broke out into a sprint and ran up the wall with his chakra before stabbing a knife into a sentry and then spinning and throwing a few more knives into nearby sentries. He flexed his chakra and his knives returned to him, and he created clones to hide the bodies while he examined the layout. So let's see, the graveyard, the armory, library, and cathedral, and an army of goons in my way. Should be fun. He commented to himself as his clones came back with the scarlet headbands, and he took them and leapt towards the graveyard. He snuck through the corridors, killing anyone that got close to him and sealing the bodies into a scroll in case he needed some distractions or reinforcements before he came across someone that his mother hated, Interrogator Vicious. He was currently torturing a Forsaken named Vorel Sengetsu, who had gone missing a few months ago. Naruto crept up behind Vicious and prepared to kill him. Vorel saw this and started chuckling, which confused Vicious. However, his confusion was cut short as Naruto's sword pierced through his chest before Naruto twisted it and tore it out. Vicious fell over dead, and Naruto cut his head off before sealing it and turned towards Vorel. "Thank you, my prince. However, I will not last long, but I have a request." Vorel uttered through gutter speak, and Naruto nodded. "That bastard took my wedding ring and gave it to his wife. Please kill her and return my ring to my bride in Hillsbrad Foothills." He requested, and Naruto nodded. "It will be done, soldier, go forth with no regrets." Naruto stated, and Vorel took one of the hot pokers that was currently shoved into him and nodded to Naruto. Naruto nodded and walked away, only hearing the faint noise of something being stabbed before a death rattle going out. Naruto approached the back of the graveyard and found an old tomb before he dodged to the side as a pillar of fire erupted. Naruto bit back a curse as he knew it would draw attention, and he created a batch of clones to go to the area where he killed Vicious, while he turned to see a skeletal figure wearing a set of armor mixed with some leather pieces attached and holding a green wand, scepter in its right hand. Naruto blinked as he recognized this person from some rumors he had heard. "Blood Mage Thalnos, what a treat. Never would have thought that you would be hiding here of all places." Naruto stated, and the now identified Thalnos didn't respond. He simply raised his wand and blasted a shadow bolt at Naruto. Naruto dodged and retaliated with a frost bolt that the mage dodged before he found Naruto in front of him, piercing his chest. He howled in agony before Naruto stuck his hand into Thalnos's chest and smirked. "Holy light." He stated before light blasted within Thalnos, and Naruto grabbed his skull before it could disintegrate and then shook his hand as using holy attacks still stung his body, but it was still better than others who tried and got turned into a pile of ash. Naruto then took the skull and sealed it and the wand away before moving back to the main area and then heading for the main areas. His clones gave him another 15 scarlet headbands as he passed, and he sealed the bodies into a scroll and headed for the library first, then the armory, and then the cathedral. 1 hour later, Naruto stood in front of the cathedral covered in blood, none of it his own, and sighed as he had one more location to clear before he could destroy this place and complete part of his mission list. So far he had another 50 headbands to his collection and another 3 heads to his collection. In the library, he killed Houndmaster Loxi and Arcanist Doan, and in the armory, the champion of the Scarlet Crusade Herod. Now he was entering the cathedral while a contingent of clones scattered and began placing explosives all over the sanctuary, and he entered the cathedral to find one target, Renaud Mograine, standing there while Sally Whitemane, former High Inquisitor of the Scarlet Crusade, stood trapped in a magic circle. Naruto, not being one for patience at most times, slammed the door closed and drew Renaud's attention. "Ah, is the father murderer having a tantrum?" Naruto stated as he walked towards Renaud. "I'll never understand why your brother never returned to confront you about your treachery and instead opted to try and convince other Scarlet members to turn their back on the crusade. Personally, I would have run you through with Ashbringer and then moved on. But now he is the leader of the Knights of the Aben Blade, and Tyrion Fordrain has the purified Ashbringer. It's strange the way things work out," Naruto stated before dodging a mace strike from Renaud before he retaliated by doing a leaping spin kick to his head, knocking the man backwards. Naruto didn't let up and drew his sword before swinging it down on him. Renault rolled out of the way and came back at Naruto with another swing which Naruto blocked with his sword. Naruto simply stood in place while Renault was grinding his teeth in exertion. Before Naruto flexed his hand and a swirling ball of energy formed in his hand and he shoved it into Renault's chest. The ball ground into his chest before it shot him back into the far wall. The force of the hit knocked the wall down and the man was barely breathing. However, Naruto did not finish him as an undead figure stepped out and stared down at the badly harmed man, who looked like he had seen a ghost, and the undead grinned at the man before it started to consume him while he was still alive. Naruto ignored the screams and approached Whitemane before removing his hood and mask. "So you are High Inquisitor Sally Whitemane? I must say, the stories about you don't do your beauty justice," he asked and stated, and the woman before him blushed at Naruto's comment and him gazing intently at her. She had white hair, blood-red eyes that had two blood-red tear streaks coming down from her eyes, and blood-red lipstick. Her outfit consisted of scarlet knee-high boots over black stockings that reached her mid-thigh, a scarlet and black leotard with a drape over her ass and crotch, scarlet gloves that reached just under her armpits with a black and gold band around her upper arms, pauldrons that were scarlet, gray, and gold, and a scarlet and gold cap on her head. Nearby there was a staff made of bronze that had a red jewel in the upper part. All in all, she looked like a deadly and priestess. "Thank you, my good sir. But who are you?" she asked while still holding the blush, and Naruto smirked. "Ah, where are my manners? My name is Ammon Manethil, the Prince of Death. My father is Arthas Manethil, the second Lich King after he killed the original over 2 decades ago." Naruto stated, and Whitemane widened her eyes. "So the rumors are true. The Forsaken are part of the Scourge again and the Lich King has been tamed by Arthas." Naruto raised an eyebrow at her knowing about the Forsaken, but chalked it up to them never believing they weren't part of the Scourge in the first place. It wasn't like the Scarlet Crusade would be able to tell anyone that, since no one would believe them, as the Horde would believe that they were trying to weaken them, and the Alliance will never trust them as they butchered several innocent people while claiming they were infected. "Yes, my father is the sole Lich King and he told me to find you as you were one of the few Scarlet members who didn't butcher anyone that didn't agree with you," Naruto stated before he cut the magic circle and then went to the undead that had killed Renault and was now cleaning the blood of himself. The male undead stood before Naruto and uttered something to him, and Naruto nodded before beheading him and then taking the, thankfully, intact head of Renault and sealed both into a scroll. Whitemane saw him do this and was intrigued. "So what are you going to do with me?" Whitemane asked, and Naruto simply looked at her. "Let you go. Though if you have a problem with my father, then you will have issues since he will have this whole world under his banner in time. My orders were to find information on you and report back. You may come with me if you wish, as my father doesn't needlessly slaughter, but will not tolerate insubordination," Naruto informed her as he began walking for the door, and she followed him. "Regardless, you can't stay here since I will be destroying this place once we clear the area," he stated, and Whitemane widened her eyes as she followed him out and found more of him that gave him more headbands before they disappeared in puffs of smoke. Naruto sealed the headbands away and began walking towards the gate before kicking said thing off of its hinges and walked out with Whitemane following closely behind him. Once they were a decent distance from the monastery, Naruto flexed his chakra and watched the fireworks as the entire structure erupted into flames and explosions before the entire thing began collapsing on itself and became a pile of burning rubble. Naruto popped his neck as he walked down the path, and Whitemane, getting over her shock, followed him. "So what are you going to do now?" Whitemane asked as she followed the strange man that was her rescuer, and said man turned his head towards her. "I'm gonna kill the other leaders of the Scarlet Crusade among other things as my final trial that my father set up for me," he stated, and Whitemane didn't have the heart to dispute the claim as she had just seen him take the entire monastery down. If he could do that with such little effort, then he could very well bring down the entire crusade. "Would you like a companion?" she asked out of the blue as they kept walking, and Naruto turned towards her. "Why?" he asked with narrowed eyes, and Whitemane felt a chill go down her spine at his eyes and had to suppress a shudder, both from fear and something else, and steeled her resolve. "They all betrayed me because I refused to execute a family when there was no sign of them being infected. They then imprisoned me and sent me to Renault for re-education or termination depending on how remorseful I was after the initial purging. I now see how corrupt they are, how corrupt I was, and I want to end it." Naruto stared at her for a moment, having not felt any emotions that said she was lying and figured she may be helpful, so he nodded, "Very well, but betray me and I will end you." White Mane nodded, while inwardly being intrigued by the man before her and wanted to know more about him. She followed Naruto when he left for a Zeppelin tower in the distance as the monastery continued to burn and crumble from whatever Naruto did. 3 months later, outside of Stratholme, Naruto and his new companion Sally had dismantled the Scarlet Crusade over the past few weeks and only had the Grand Crusader Seidan Daithrahan left to kill. But they decided it would be wise to destroy the Dreadlord Mal'Ganis first, and then there was the fact that Naruto sensed demonic energy flowing inside Stratholme. They also had gotten Voral's ring back after killing Vish's wife and his supposed father before dropping the ring off with Voral's wife. They had been wandering for 2 days before they finally caught sight of Mal'Ganis in his human disguise. He had a small detachment of crusaders with him, but nothing they hadn't already dealt with. Naruto began by doing hand signs, fire style, grand fireball. He called and blew between his index and middle fingers and his thumb before fire streamed out and turned into a large fireball. Mal'Ganis leapt away while the crusaders were hit. Naruto stepped out and stood before the Dreadlord. "Hello Mal'Ganis, it seems my father missed your black heart by a few centimeters." "Something I don't intend to do," Naruto stated with smirk while the human form frowned before changing to reveal Mal'Ganis with a large frown on his face. "So, the great Lich King sends a boy to fight me. How pathetic. Is the great and powerful lord so afraid to fight me?" he stated, and Naruto chuckled before full-blown laughing. "Him, afraid of you? That's rich." "No, he sent me because I was out and about and he is tired of you being an annoying insect," Naruto replied, and Mal'Ganis gritted his teeth. "Insolent fool. You dare mock, URG." He never got to finish his sentence as Naruto was in front of him and burying his fist into Mal'Ganis' gut. Mal'Ganis skid back across the ground while black blood came from his mouth as he tried to regain his breath. However, Naruto wasn't giving him that chance as he appeared with an overhead strike that Mal'Ganis attempted to block with his claws. I say attempted because Naruto's sword cleaved right through them. Mal'Ganis screamed in pain before Naruto stabbed his sword in the ground and walked toward the demon. Mal'Ganis, seeing this and being enraged by his insolence, charged at him with his fist cocked back. He threw the punch, but Naruto caught it and slammed his forearm into Mal'Ganis' elbow, shattering it and bending it backwards. Naruto then kicked him in his left knee where there was a resounding crack from the joint breaking. Mal'Ganis howled in pain as he sank to his knees before he screamed louder as Naruto gripped his horns and tore them off. Naruto then slammed him onto the ground before he grabbed hold of his wings and tore them off with brute force. Mal'Ganis continued screaming as Naruto picked him up and called his sword to him by way of Bansho Tenin. "Universal pull, as I said, nothing but an annoying insect," Naruto stated before shoving the blade through Mal'Ganis' heart before Naruto withdrew it and decapitated him. Naruto cleaned his blade before kneeling down and tearing out Mal'Ganis' heart and sealed it with the head before burning the corpse. Naruto then turned towards the bushes and waved Sally out towards him. "It's safe, Sally-chan, we can head for Stratholme," he stated, and Sally came out and walked towards him. "That was impressive, Ammon," she stated as Naruto had not given her his real name yet but had started becoming closer to her. "Thank you, Sally-chan, but it was nothing. Let's get moving before it gets too dark to see, though I wouldn't mind cuddling with you again," he stated with a smirk, and Sally blushed as one night was extremely cold and Naruto awoke with Sally in his arms and her curled into his chest. When she awoke, she blushed and began apologizing before Naruto informed her that it was fine and she was free to do that again whenever. Thus, it had become an almost nightly occurrence of her curling up next to him and him wrapping his arms around her. "Let's just get going, Ammon," she stated with the blush still present, and Naruto chuckled lightly before they left for Stratholme. 3 hours later, Scarlet Bastion. Naruto and Sally had a successful infiltration, though Sally still had a lingering blush from Naruto carrying her bridal style up the wall and back down it, of the Scarlet Crusade section of the city, and had torn apart the Crusaders and allowed the undead to flood the streets of the Crusader side while Naruto left clones to collect the headbands. Currently, Naruto was approaching where the Grand Crusader was located. Naruto and Sally were currently decimating the Crusaders that got in their way before coming to a large throne-like room. Naruto gazed at the man before him and sensed strong demonic energy within him. Narrowing his eyes, he stopped Sally from approaching. "Sally-chan, stay back. He's not what he appears to be," he stated, and Sally nodded and stood back as Naruto approached. The man frowned at Naruto as he stepped into the circular area he stood in. "Such insolence, to think a boy would believe he could take me on," he stated, and Naruto smirked before slamming his hands on the ground and a large bubble appeared over the room. Naruto stood straight with his smirk. "Now, until one of us is dead, that barrier isn't going down. Nothing is getting in or out until then," he stated as he drew his sword and walked forward before blocking an overhead strike from the Grand Crusader. Naruto held fast before smirking and putting his other hand at the Crusader's chest. "Shinra Tensei," he stated before the Grand Crusader was sent flying backwards before smashing into the barrier. The man got up with blood leaking from his mouth and nose, and Naruto smirked. "Come on, is that all you got?" he taunted before the man was in front of him again and coming in with a thrust. Naruto smirked and parried the attack before bringing his boot up under the man's chin, sending him sailing backwards. The man was about to slam into the barrier again before Naruto appeared and sliced off his arm and gave a strong punch to the man and sent him sailing across the room again. The man flipped in the air before landing on his feet. The man gritted his teeth before chuckling and then full-blown laughing. "Fool, you think you have won? I haven't even begun to fight," he stated in a demonic voice before his skin started melting off and he grew in size until he stood before Naruto as an even larger version of Mal'Ganis with his arms still intact. Naruto raised an eyebrow. "The Dreadlord Balnazar? Too bad Varamathras has already been killed, as I would have loved to torture him for his treachery before I claimed his head. Perhaps I could use that technique to get some semblance of payback," Naruto mused to himself while ignoring the towering figure of a Dreadlord before him, much to the shock of Sally and the annoyance of Balnazar. Said Dreadlord moved to stomp Naruto, who stuck his sword out for the Dreadlord to impale his foot upon. It took all of 2 seconds for the Dreadlord to process what happened before he began screaming and jumping around with his foot in pain. "Do you mind? I'm plotting how to torture your brother's soul over here," Naruto stated with annoyance while ignoring the jumping and screaming demon near him, while Sally just sweat dropped at the sight of the supposed second most powerful Dreadlord to exist acting like a fool. Balnazar regained his composure before glaring hatefully at Naruto. "I will end you, worm," he shouted before he had to dodge a fireball his size that was launched at him. He stood and stared at Naruto, who looked irritated at the being before him, much like a person does a mosquito. Balnazar grit his teeth before he started letting his demonic aura flow, as most humans couldn't stand up to such an aura. Sally shivered slightly as she had to use holy magic to keep herself from being harmed by the demonic energy that was being released. However, to both of their shocks, Naruto just stood there with a bored expression on his face. "Is that what you call a demonic aura?" "This is a demonic aura," he stated before he walked forward and blasted out his demonic energy while changing into his Hanyu form. Sally was awed, shocked, and turned on slightly by his display and his looks, while Balnazar was in shock. "Impossible. There is no possible way a child could possess this much power. This must be some form of illusion he somehow trapped me in. Yes, that must be it," he thought as he approached Naruto and slammed his foot down on him. A large dust cloud kicked up and Sally was afraid as she hadn't seen him move. "Ammon," she cried out as tears started to form in her eyes before she heard a voice ring out. Balnazar was smirking as he knew the boy was nothing to worry about before he heard something that made his blood run cold. "Shadow magic. Piercing shackles," the voice said before shadowed tendrils shot out of the ground and pierced the Dreadlord through his hands, elbows, shoulders, feet, knees, thighs, stomach, and chest. Balnazar screamed in pain as Naruto then appeared before him out of the shadows and swung his sword in a flurry of motions before sheathing it in one fluid motion. As soon as his sword made a click, Balnazar howled in pain as his fingers, hands, forearms, upper arms, toes, feet, calves, and thighs all separated from him in that order. His torso and head hung there as the shadows consumed the pieces Naruto cut off before Naruto approached him. What are you?" Balnazar stated as blood ran from his mouth and Naruto gazed at him with his cold crimson eyes before shoving his blade into Balnazar's chest. "I'm complicated," Naruto stated before beheading Balnazar, and the shadows consumed the torso. Naruto returned to normal and sealed the demon's head in a scroll before dropping the barrier. He turned just in time to catch Sally as she lunged at him in a hug. Feeling something damp hit his chest, he looked down to see her crying and he frowned slightly. "Sally-chan, what's the matter?" he asked with concern, and she looked up at him. "I thought you had died when Balnazar tried to crush you. I was so scared, She didn't finish her sentence as she suddenly lunged forward and kissed Naruto. Naruto widened his eyes slightly before deepening the kiss and pinning her to a wall before he started groping her ass while cupping her left cheek, her face. "Come on people." Sally moaned into the kiss and wrapped her arms around his neck. She had been getting a developing crush since he saved her, and then over the past month with him she was starting to fall for him. They broke from the kiss a few minutes later with Naruto still holding her ass and cheek. "Amen, She didn't finish as Naruto gave her a light peck on the lips. "Sally-chan, Ammon is my given name when my father adopted me. My real name is Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze," he stated, and she widened her eyes slightly before nodding. "There are things you need to know about me if you wish to pursue a relationship, so please listen to me," he stated as he released her ass and let her stand while he continued cupping her cheek. "I am not from Azeroth or Outland. My world is far off and my father found it when a powerful demon attacked my home and my biological father sealed it into me. For 4 years I was abused, neglected, and treated like trash before my father Arthas came and took me away. I trained for 5 years before the demon inside me aged me to 18 and turned me into a half-demon or Hanyu. My father then turned me into a Death Knight and I trained and fought for 10 years growing in power and knowledge. I am currently taking a test to show that I am worthy of the throne of the Lich King should the need arise," he stated, and she was silent through it all, though she did show shock at the beginning, then horror and sadness, relief, interest, and amazement. Naruto then smiled softly. "However, one of the most important things you must know is that if you want a relationship with me, then you must share me with other women," he stated, and she widened her eyes and blushed as bright as a tomato. "It is customary for my clans, or noble families, that if one is the last of the clan, that they are to try and repopulate the clan to preserve the legacies, and I am the heir to 3 clans. While I have no interest in marrying women just to do so, I do plan to be with any woman who attains a piece of my heart. Just as you have, and I have 3 such women already, and I do not know how many more I will be with, but I have made it clear to the ones that I am with that I will love my women equally and ensure they each receive quality time with me. I refuse to simply use women to repopulate my family, though I won't say I mind having more than one wife," he stated honestly, and Sally was silent for a minute before she smiled and kissed Naruto while guiding his hand back to her ass. Naruto inwardly smirked and pushed her back against the wall, and she moaned as he started gripping her ass tight. A few minutes later she broke the kiss to breathe. "I don't mind at all, Naruto. As long as I can have you, then I don't mind others getting you as well," she stated before she blushed and leaned in towards his ear. "I can also enjoy myself with the other girls when you are busy, or even with you too," she stated, and kissed his cheek while Naruto smirked and slapped her ass, which she blushed and squeaked at. "Don't tempt me, Sally-chan. My demon blood makes me very possessive and I have to hold back from claiming my women daily until I am ready to do so," he stated, and she smirked before moving his other hand to her ass. "Good, I'm ready and willing whenever you want to take me," she stated before taking him into another kiss before Naruto gripped her ass and lifted her up while she was flush with the wall. Sally moaned and wrapped her arms around him, and they continued for a few minutes before Naruto pulled back. "Be patient, Sally-chan. I'll take you and the others after I pass this test," he stated before giving her one last peck on the lips and setting her down while she nodded. "Now, we need to get back to Undercity, then we'll head for Stormwind as there is someone there I need to speak to," he stated, and she nodded before taking another kiss from him, and they left the room and headed for the exit. 5 months later. Capital City. Stormwind. Nighttime. The past 3 weeks had been good for the budding lovers as they talked more openly and frequently, and each had stories to tell, scars to share, and wounds to help heal. Sally was shocked to say the least when she learned the very demon Naruto had inside him became one of his loves, and that he had a former high elf as a lover as well. She had feared that she would not get as much time with Naruto due to her being mortal until he informed her that when he marks her, she still turned into a cherry when she thought about how he does that. She'll live as long as he does and then a few more years onto that. Needless to say, she was ecstatic and showed that enthusiasm by having nightly make-out and slight groping sessions. Here and now though, Naruto was looking over the castle to find the easiest way to the queen while Sally was shopping for some new clothes as her current ones were getting worn out and she needed to upgrade to some new clothes. Naruto was gazing over the castle walls and the guards scattered across them. He frowned slightly, not because it was difficult, just the opposite. With his skills and abilities, he could get in and out without anyone even knowing he was there. He was broken from his thoughts by sensing Sally behind and he turned only widened his eyes slightly and whistled low and appreciatively. Like before she wore a leotard but this one was black and hugged her body tight to accentuate her curves, and also showed Naruto she wasn't wearing a bra. She wore heeled black leather boots that reached her knee with crimson stockings going to just under her ass, crimson gloves that reached just past her elbows with blue gems on the back of her hands, a black cloak with the inside being crimson that had a hood and went far enough to cover herself down to her shoes, and a black circlet with a ruby in the center and red runes splayed across it. The final touch to her outfit was a black choker that Naruto smirked at because in the center was a crimson Uzumaki spiral. In her hands was dark purple staff that had red runes across it that looked like a twisting branch made out of metal that came up into a crab claw looking bladed top with a black jewel in the base of the claw and a spike at the opposite end of the staff. All in all, she looked just as deadly and as before. Naruto smiled at her and approached before tracing his finger on the choker. "Showing your mind already, Sally-chan?" he stated while keeping the smirk, and Sally smiled and gave him a light kiss. "Why not? I will be yours and only yours soon enough, and only you and my sisters will ever touch me without feeling someone's wrath," she stated with a smile that Naruto returned and gave her another kiss. "Very true, my dear, very true. Now, I'll be back shortly, you wait here and hopefully I'll be back with some company," he stated, and Sally frowned before Naruto shook his head. "Not for me. She was a love of my father's before he began his path of vengeance," he stated, and the frown disappeared and she nodded. The only reason she frowned is because Naruto had told her of the women he planned to seek a relationship with and he hadn't mentioned someone in Stormwind. Naruto smiled again and kissed her before disappearing in a swirl of leaves. She sighed and shook her head with a smile before moving to the inn they were staying at for the night. Naruto was over the inner wall with ease and was using a technique he had come up with called shadow stepping that allowed him to move from one shadow to another so long as he could see the shadow he was moving to. Moving like that made it incredibly easy to get around the courtyard, and he began running up the wall the moment he was clear and began looking for a room that would house the queen. He stopped however when he heard crying. Frowning, he approached the window he heard it from and leaned in. "Oh Arthas, I miss you. The man I married is cruel and uncaring to the people. Why did you have to leave? Why didn't you at least take me with you?" He heard a woman sobbing and he frowned before he tapped on the window. He heard nothing before the inner shutters of the window opened and revealed the woman known as Tiffin Ilarian Rin. Naturally the woman was about to scream before Naruto showed her a letter he was to give her with, "My flowering angel," written on it, which caused her to widen her eyes and open the window as only Arthas ever called her that. Naruto entered the window and looked around before handing the letter to Tiffin. "My father sent me to give this to you," Naruto stated, and Tiffin took the letter and read it. "My flowering angel, I have missed you in the years since I departed on that mission to find the source of the plague in the lands. Much has happened since then. No doubt you have heard of the deeds I committed while a Death Knight and the acts I committed after becoming the Lich King. Know that during those times, I was not in control as the original Lich King had me trapped under his power. However, 20 years ago, I was able to break free and destroy the original Lich King. I now have the Scourge, the Forsaken, the army of Theramore Isle, and the dragons of Dragonblight under my command. Know that I have taken 3 wives already and I plan to take 2 others and you as well, if you will have me. I will not say that I love you more than the others, but I will say that I love you and have never forgotten you. Jaina has already joined me and we are happy together, but my heart has never forgotten you. My adopted son and heir, Ammon, stands before you at my request to inform you that I live and that I wish to have you by my side as I create a new age of peace for all races. I eagerly wait to hear your reply, and my son has been instructed to bring you to me should you wish it. With all the love that I possess for you, Arthas Menethil, the second Lich King." Tears flowed from her eyes as she finished reading the letter, and Naruto smiled at her as she wiped the tears away and smiled. "Can you give me time to pack Ammon?" I wish to see Arthas and leave that bastard of a husband I have and his son. In this universe, she married Varian when he already had Anduin and became Anduin's stepmother. She asked and stated, and Naruto nodded, "Of course, my lady. If you'd be so kind to excuse me for a moment, as I am also tasked with killing Varian if the situation presents itself," he stated, and she smiled at him. "Please call me Tiffin, though you may call me mother if you would like, since I will be with your father. After you and I get to know each other better, that is. As for killing that bastard, do me a favor and remove his family jewels if you would be so kind," she stated with a sickly sweet smile, and Naruto twitched slightly at the mention of what she wanted removed. "Of course, should I bring them to show you that I did so, or?" He left open, and Tiffin took a thinking pose. "Bring them, as then I can vouch to your father that you did me a favor," she stated with a wink, and Naruto was reminded just how scary a woman scorned could be before he nodded. "All right. Please be ready when I get back, as we must pick up a companion of mine before we return to Icecrown, and I would rather do this in a timely manner. Not to say I want to rush you, of course," he stated, and she nodded before she got a large bag and then looked over herself before shaking her head and moving to change while Naruto left the room quietly. Naruto crept through the halls using his rogue, ninja, and shadowmancer skills to remain undetected as he crept towards the king's bedchambers. What kind of man willingly doesn't sleep in the same room as his gorgeous wife? Naruto thought as he approached the room and crept inside before raising an eyebrow at what he was seeing. "Oh. That kind of guy," Naruto thought with a shiver, as before him was King Varian, and another guy, who were both clearly naked and were cuddling together under the blankets. Naruto shuddered slightly before thinking, maybe my new mother will reward me for taking out his lover too. Naruto thought before making clones and restrained the two before gagging them and getting ready for the dirty work. "Nothing personal, you two, just business and helping my family," he stated before going to work, and muffled screams were heard outside the room. About 5 minutes later, Naruto returned to Tiffin's room with scroll in hand and saw her in an elegant red dress and a large bag beside her. "Did you do what I asked?" she asked, and Naruto nodded before unrolling the scroll and unsealing the heads and genitals of the two men. Apparently he didn't want a wife, Naruto stated, and Tiffin scowled before nodding. "Serves the bastard right. Using me just so rumors wouldn't spread about him and he could save face. Thank you for taking out both of them, Ammon. Can we go now?" she stated and asked before Naruto nodded and sealed her bag and picked her up bridal style. "Pardon my actions, Tiffin, but it will be faster this way," he stated, and she nodded before he began leaping across the buildings back to where he left Sally. 5 minutes later, they arrived, and Naruto found Sally asleep in her bed and smiled down at her. He leaned down and kissed her cheek. "Sally-chan, time to get up," he stated, and she opened her eyes softly and sat up and was shocked to see the Queen of Stormwind before Naruto calmed her and told her what happened. Naruto then took out a hearthstone and they disappeared from the room. Icecrown Citadel. At that moment, Arthas and the others were in the throne room waiting, as they had not heard from Naruto in over 3 months, and everyone but Arthas was getting worried for the young man. Even the stoic Kel'Thuzad had shown concern for the boy, so you can imagine how Kin, Kira, and Variso were acting. Arthas had been the calm one, as he knew fully well that his son was no pushover and only himself, Deathwing, Nefarian, Illidan Stormrage, or Kil'jaeden would be capable of beating him in combat. He was broken from his thoughts when he felt something, and he smiled before he stood, which gained everyone's attention before a glow appeared in the middle of the throne room, and there stood Naruto with 2 women that Arthas and his group knew. Naruto turned to his father and knelt. "I have completed 3 of my missions, father," Naruto stated before Arthas had him rise, and Naruto turned. "I present Queen Tiffin Ilarian Rin, widow of King Varian Rin, and Sally Whitemane, former High Inquisitor of the Scarlet Crusade and one of my future mates," he stated, and Arthas and his wives smirked at the last part, while Kyuubi and Variso were examining Sally to see if she was worthy of being with their future husband, while Makoto was blushing slightly and looking mildly jealous. Everyone was broken from their thoughts as Tiffin approached Arthas and removed his helm before looking into his eyes and tearing up slightly. "It is you," she stated before kissing him. Arthas gladly returned the kiss, and his wives smiled at the loving action, while Sally, Kira, and Variso were thinking about wanting to do that with Naruto. A few minutes later, Arthas broke the kiss and Tiffin moved to talk, gossip with the other wives and get to know them while Arthas turned to Naruto who opened a scroll and revealed Malgana's head and heart. He is not the only dreadlord I encountered, father. Naruto stated, and his father looked at him confused. The leader of the Scarlet Crusade was really the dreadlord Balnazar. Naruto stated before opening another scroll and showing the Scarlet Crusaders' heads. His large collection of over 400 headbands, the reports he had of Scarlet Crusade information, and Balnazar's head. Arthas frowned, as did Sylvanas. It is a shame that Varimathras is already dead, or I would enjoy torturing him for even further treachery. Sylvanas stated before she saw Naruto's evil-looking smirk and smiled at her son's thoughtfulness. Oh, has my darling son been a dear and done something to fix that problem? She asked, and everyone turned to Naruto before he activated the Rinnegan and held a soul gem in his hand. Naraka Path, King of Hell. Naruto stated before a large apparition appeared behind him and Naruto tossed the soul gem into its mouth. The apparition glowed before spitting out the dreadlord reincarnated. Varimathras groaned as he got to his knees before he attempted to blast Sylvanas with one of his attacks, but nothing occurred and he widened his eyes in shock and fear as Naruto grabbed him by his throat and lifted him off the ground. You didn't think I would bring you back with your powers intact, did you? Naruto asked while grinning ferally at him. You're no stronger than an average ghoul now. Naruto stated before tossing him forward for Arthas to catch. Remember me, Dreadlord? Arthas asked as he began suffocating Varimathras before he tossed him at Kel's feet. Lock that filth in the dungeon. I'm sure my queen of the Banshees will enjoy her fun with him later. He ordered and Kel nodded before elite skeletons came and dragged the screaming demon away, while Sylvanas came and gave Arthas a searing kiss before going to Naruto and kissing his cheek and embracing him. Thank you for my gift, my son. She stated, and Naruto smiled and nodded. Of course, mother. He stated before turning to his father. 3 missions complete and 5 more to go. I will leave in 2 days for Kalimdor. He stated, and his father nodded. Very well, my son. Lady Whitemane will remain here and will be safe. He informed, and Naruto nodded as she was only able to help until he came back, so now he had to travel alone again. Arthas then turned to Falric. Take the heads and have them mounted on spears at the main gate to Icecrown. He ordered, and Falric nodded before Arthas turned back to his son and saw the look in his eyes and nodded. Ammon, walk with me. Arthas stated, and everyone knew that was code for, no one follow us as we need to talk in private. Arthas and Naruto walked off while Jaina, Sylvanas, and Alexstrasza walked off with Tiffin while Kira and Verisa did the same with Sally. Kin sighed slightly before Konan led her away to train more while Makoto went to wait for Naruto. Itachi and Shisui simply left to go train while Kel went to supervise some experiments they were working on. Arthas and Naruto walked out to the landing that Arthas had first taken him to and simply looked over the frozen tundra that was their home and land. They just stared for a few minutes before Arthas broke the silence. What is it, my son? Arthas asked, and Naruto simply stared out for a few moments before speaking. When I fought Balnazar, I had hoped for him to prove himself as the strongest living dreadlord, and something primal inside me wanted him to push me and force me to have to go into more power. However, he was nothing but an insect that was irritating me. He sated, and Arthas began to catch on. You believe it was your draconic blood urging you into combat? He asked, and Naruto nodded. I know most dragons are peaceful beings, but with my demon blood and death knight powers also affecting the draconic blood, then there is no telling what may be happening. I believe I need to fight an opponent strong enough to force me to tap into my latent powers. Grommash Hellscream will probably get me close if I have to fight him, but Illidan Stormrage and his group or the dragon Onyxia will more than likely be able to push me into the level one need to be at. He stated, and Arthas nodded, as many people do not unlock their potential unless forced to reach that power. In 2 days, I will charter a boat to our allies at Theramore and end Onyxia first, then head for Grommash's grave before heading to speak to Tyrande Whisperwind. After that is done, I will return here, if needed, and prepare to leave for Outland. He stated, and Arthas nodded before smirking. I doubt your future mates would let you leave before then anyway. He stated, and Naruto chuckled. True. He stated, and Arthas shared in the chuckle before they continued to gaze over their land. A few minutes later, Naruto was walking back to his room while looking over his mission list and crossing out the finished jobs. 1. Rescue Maiev Shadow Song from Illidan Stormrage's fortress. Secondary objectives. 1. Kill Illidan Stormrage, only if the opportunity presents itself. 2. Kill Lady Vosh. 3. Kill Kel'Thas Sunstrider, and 4. Kill Akama of the Draenei. 3. Get word to Tyrande Whisperwind that Ner'zhul is dead. Secondary objectives. 1. Kill Fandral Staghelm. 2. Give Tyrande Whisperwind a way to get to Icecrown. 5. Find Grommash Hellscream's axe and grave, revive him, and see if he will side with Lord Arthas. Secondary objectives. 1. Find the Pit Lord Manaroth's twin-sided sword and bring it to the Frozen Throne. 2. Ensure the Pit Lord is truly dead and is not merely biding his time to strike. 6. Kill Onyxia the matriarch of the Black Dragonflight in her den within Dustwallow Marsh. Secondary objectives. 1. Bring proof of each member of her brood you kill. 2. Bring any artifacts she may have hoarded over the centuries back to the Frozen Throne. 3. Destroy her brood down to the last egg, unless you happen to find a hatchling that is not corrupted by her yet. 8. Unlock your dragon blood. He rolled the scroll up and put it in his vest before he saw Makoto standing by his door and looked over her appreciatively. He began walking towards her and Makoto looked up at him and smiled as Naruto continued walking until he stood in front of Makoto, who barely had time to react to seeing Naruto before she was brought into a soul-searing kiss from the blonde. She widened her eyes before relaxing and deepening the kiss and giving his tongue permission to enter her mouth. This continued for a few minutes before he moved to her ear. When I am done with this test, I want to court you, Makoto-chan. He stated, and she blushed and squeaked, which, naturally, caused him to smirk, and he started running his hands up and down her sides in a slow and sensual manner while whispering in her ear, "Would you like that, Makoto-chan? Would you like me to make you my woman and mate and spend Kami knows how many years together?" He stated as he grabbed her ass and began kissing her neck to accentuate his point, and she blushed bright red before nodding. "Hi. I would love that, Naruto-kun, and I know you will take others and I am fine with that so long as I get my time with you," she stated with the blush lingering before she took another kiss from Naruto and was feeling happy from getting the blonde man as hers even if she had to share. She was also content to know Itachi didn't care who she dated as long as she was happy, and even encouraged her to date Naruto if he sought a relationship with her. Technically speaking, they were only separated by 10 years of age, and due to Naruto's demon, draconic, and Uzumaki blood, he was going to live an unnaturally long life already, and then add in him being a DK, and his lifespan was unknowable, and he could mark his women as his mates and they would live right beside him. She broke the kiss and left while making a show of swaying her hips as she knew he was watching, and on the inside she was as giddy as a schoolgirl at the prospect of having a relationship with Naruto. This became evident when she arrived at her room, got on her bed, put her face in her pillow, and squealed in delight. Back with Naruto, he entered his room to find an arousing sight. In front of him, Verisa and Sally were locked in a heated kiss while Kira was groping their asses and kissing both of their necks. Naruto chuckled, getting their attention. "Should I go?" he asked before he was on the bed on his back with Kira straddling him and kissing him directly while Verisa and Sally were kissing his cheeks and neck before Naruto pulled them into a four-way kiss. A few minutes later they broke for oxygen and the women cuddled close to him while he wrapped his arms around them. "I'm leaving in 2 days to continue the test. While I'm gone I want you all to get to know each other and don't leave Makoto-chan out," he stated, and the three nodded while loving being in his arms, though Kira pouted. "Ah, do you have to leave so soon, Naruto-kun?" she asked, and the other two nodded before Naruto smirked. "You know, the sooner I complete the test, the sooner I mark you as my mates, right?" he stated, and all three women jolted up and blushed, and Kira spoke first. Maybe you should leave tomorrow instead, Naruto-kun," she stated, and the other two nodded with equal blushes, while Naruto smirked. "I need some relaxation between missions. I'll leave in 2 days, that way I can spend some time with you three, Makoto-chan, and Kin-chan," he stated, and the last name got them to settle down as they knew Kin loved Naruto as a brother and it wasn't fair to her to not let him spend any time with her. They nodded and Kira kissed Naruto lightly. "Okay, Naruto-kun. We'll wait for as long as it takes," she stated, and the other two nodded while Naruto smiled at three of his loves. "Thank you. Now let's get some sleep," he stated, and they nodded before snuggling back into him and drifting to sleep, with 3 words being heard before they drifted asleep. "I love you," Naruto whispered before falling asleep with his loves right beside him. 3 months later, swamplands of Dustwallow Marsh. Naruto trudged through the marshes of the Dust Wallow as none of the gators or spiders wanted to mess with him. It's an animal thing. But Naruto could sense something watching him and was waiting for him. He knew Onyxia would have scouts out and about to ensure nothing that she considered a threat would get close enough to be harmful to her or her brood. The problem was identifying them from the animals that were watching him to ensure they stayed out of his way. It wasn't until he reached a clearing in front of the mountain in the Worm Bog that whelps, dragonkin, and a drake named Smolderwing came out and surrounded him. Naruto simply drew his sword, which was pulsing for some reason, before the whelps charged in, and he began bisecting them as the dragonkin charged in. Naruto spun and decapitated a few dragonkin before twisting and cleaving a few more whelps in half and then leapt high into the air, wind style. Eye of the storm. He called out and the winds picked up explosively and began cutting through the whelps and dragonkin before they settled down and Naruto stood before Smolderwing. Smolderwing growled at Naruto and he stood his ground, bring it. Naruto stated and the Smolderwing roared at him before charging. Naruto charged forward as well before leaping over his snapping maws and slicing off his wings. Smolderwing howled in pain before he whipped its tail at Naruto. Naruto raised his hand at the incoming tail, Shinra Tensei. The tail slammed back into the ground before Naruto impaled it with his sword. Smolderwing roared to the sky before Naruto took a Rasengan to his spine and drilled right through it. Naruto stood and called his sword back with Bansho Tenin and he heard thunder cracking in the distance before rain started falling. Naruto stood there letting the rain wash the blood off him before creating clones to collect a fang from each enemy he killed and having a few follow him to collect the corpses and teeth as he went, since he had no doubt there would be a small army between him and Onyxia. After removing his armor, as he knew it was going to get scraped up and he needed to be as mobile as he could, and sealing it into a scroll and stashing it safely in a tree, Naruto charged into the cave, deciding to just get it over with, and found a wall of dragonkin and whelps in front of him. He smirked and charged chakra through his blade and swung it forward, sending out a wave of chakra and mana before he watched it cleave through a section of them. He then stabbed his sword into the ground and flew through hand signs with one hand while channeling magic into the other, lightning style. Thor's hammer. Shadow magic. Shadow blast. He called as a hammer of lightning came into his hand and a shadowy mass came into the other. He reared back and threw his arms forward, sending the attacks flying. The hammer slammed into one enemy before flying through into more before it exploded in a blast of lightning and the shadowy mass launched out and slammed into a section of them, hurling them into the wall. Naruto picked up his sword and walked farther in as his clones checked to ensure they were dead and gather the fangs. Naruto entered a larger area of the cavern where he heard chuckling echoing throughout. So what measly creature has come to my den and dared to kill so many of my brood? The dark voice echoed and Naruto sighed. I am Ammon Manethil, son of Arthas Manethil and adopted son of Alexstrasza. He stated, and he could feel the shock coming from the being in the poorly lit cavern. I am here to end your madness brought upon by your father, Deathwing, and I intend to carry out that mission. And perhaps gain my dragon blood in full. Naruto stated and then thought as an angry growl was coming from above him. I see. Well then, let's not delay. The voice said before Naruto leapt away as a tail came crashing down on his position before he brought his hand to his mouth and blew out a large fireball illuminating the cavern and showing Onyxia in all her glory. Naruto examined her closely before thrusting his hand out, Shinra Tensei. He called and Onyxia found herself being blasted back into the ceiling, which cracked under the force, before she fell to the cavern floor. Naruto stayed ready as he knew it wouldn't be that easy, and true enough she rose again and breathed flames at him. Naruto pumped chakra and mana to his legs and leapt over the fire before coming down with his sword. Onyxia was able to move in time but lost one of her horns to Naruto's blade. She roared in pain before glaring at Naruto, who glared right back, and the two circled each other. You're not a normal man, I'll give you that. But you are no match for me, she stated, and Naruto smirked. Is that arrogance or fear in your voice, Onyxia? Naruto asked and got a growl for his trouble as he smirked and she charged at him. Naruto dodged her snapping maw and her claws and gave her a few cuts to her legs and underbelly each time he dodged. Onyxia roared in pain and rage before she was able to hit Naruto with her tail and slam him into cavern wall while his sword was sent to the opposite side and impaled in the wall. Naruto grunted as he stood and shook his head before he was slammed into the wall again by a large foot, paw before he was dragged and pinned by said appendage, and Onyxia chuckled, "Still think I fear you, boy?" Naruto had his head down, which kept her from seeing his smirk. "You don't yet, but you should," he stated before he gazed at her with crimson eyes with cerulean slitted pupils. Naruto chuckled as he changed into his Hanyu form and breathed a stream of fire at Onyxia, forcing her to let him go. Onyxia growled before she took to flying in the cavern until spears of ice rained on her back and, while they didn't penetrate, they frosted her wings and made her come back down to his level as he used chakra through his claws to extend them as he swiped them and sent blades at her and cut into her sides a bit, causing her to roar in pain. She stood again and observed the man before her and growled at the demonic energy flowing through him. "What is this man? How can he be this strong?" she thought to herself before she leapt at him, and he dodged before she flapped her wings to create a gust of wind that knocked him off balance enough for her to hit him with her tail and slam him into the ground. Naruto coughed up blood as one of the spikes at the end of her tail cut into his side. He growled before taking hold of her tail and snapping one of the spikes off before driving it into her tail. Onyxia roared in pain before Naruto pushed his way out and growled as his hair, tail, and ears turned white and his eyes turned black with crimson slits. Naruto channeled magic to his hands before unleashing a death coil as big as himself. It slammed into Onyxia and Onyxia roared in agony as that sapped a large amount of her strength. Naruto was breathing heavily, but he had enough to crush his enemy. Onyxia was starting to get afraid as this mere mortal had harmed her more than anyone and she didn't know if she could win. However, both of their thoughts were broken as the ceiling broke and another large dragon landed. When the smoke cleared, it showed someone that was making Naruto curse the world at the moment, while Onyxia looked on with glee. The dragon was none other than Onyxia's brother Nefarian. Said dragon looked at Naruto and, while impressed a mortal had such power, looked at his sister with disapproval. "Onyxia, you let this worm of a being harm and push you to this extent?" he asked with no hidden anger or annoyance present, as it was all plainly felt and heard, and Onyxia rose to her feet. "I underestimated this insect, but now that you're here he will not stand a chance," she stated while grinning evilly at Naruto, and Nefarian nodded. "Indeed, he won't," he stated before swinging his tail and impaling Onyxia through her heart. "Especially now that you've served some purpose and weakened him," he stated before ripping his tail out of Onyxia as she fell over dead and shifted into her human form with a gaping hole in her chest. Nefarian then turned to Naruto and started approaching him, while Naruto was cursing his luck as he wasn't strong enough to take this damn dragon on, but he was still going to try. He blew a fireball out before spitting out a tornado that engulfed the flames and hit Nefarian square on and knocked him back a few feet. However, there was no visible damage and Naruto then launched another death coil and he smacked it aside. Nefarian then swung his tail at Naruto and he leapt over it only to be smashed into the ground by Nefarian's paw. Nefarian then began stomping on him repeatedly before Naruto stabbed his claws into Nefarian's foot and dragged them through his scaly flesh. The dragon roared before removing his foot and biting Naruto's arm, causing Naruto to shout in pain. Nefarian then began to swing him around like a rag doll before flinging him into the cavern wall. Naruto slammed into the wall with a grunt as his arm bled and blood came from his mouth, and the rain pouring in wasn't helping either. He tried to stand but his body was not cooperating. "Damn it. Come on, dragon blood. Give me some fucking power already," he thought angrily before feeling his body pulse. Apparently Nefarian felt it too as he stopped and saw power explode from Naruto as he rose to his feet and began shifting into a larger creature. Nefarian didn't know what was happening, but he couldn't see at the moment as the power was blinding. A few moments later he was sent hurtling back into the cavern wall with a large gash on his chest and looked to see what hit him. He widened his eyes as he saw what Naruto had turned into. Before him was a large silver dragon almost twice Nefarian's size with black eyes that had crimson slits, cerulean magatama in a ring around the slits and purple rings echoing out. Its face was more angular like an arrowhead with the point being its snout. The front feet were more like a bird's talons with 5 toes on it. The wings were large and had one spike at the joint of where the wing curved to go outward, while at the tips of the wings were another 5 spikes. The horns on its head were black as were the claws on its feet, paws, the spikes on its wings, and the spikes going down its spine, leading to a tail with what looked like a double-sided battle axe. The scales were strange as they almost looked like overlapping knives, kunai in this case, and the underbelly was gray. The dragon looked at Nefarian with a seriously pissed-off expression. "You're going to die here, Nefarian," it stated in deep rumbling voice as the draconic Naruto bared its teeth at Nefarian and said. Black Dragon felt a very human chill of fear go down his spine. Naruto then launched at Nefarian with speed that belied his size and slammed Nefarian into the wall before digging his claws into his shoulders and blasted silver fire onto Nefarian, which caused him to roar out in pain before Naruto threw him into the opposite wall while chopping a large chunk of Nefarian's tail off with the battle axe-like head of his own tail. Nefarian got up with the left side of his body burned badly, which the rain was agitating, his shoulders were bleeding, and his tail was about a quarter shorter. Whereas Naruto seemed to be in perfect shape and ready to continue. Speaking of the man-dragon, he was stalking closer to Nefarian, who lashed out with his flame breath and smirked as it hit Naruto. However, his celebration was short-lived as Naruto just walked right through it without a burn or anything. He growled and launched at Naruto, who met him midway, and they began clawing and biting, though Naruto's fangs and claws were penetrating more than Nefarian's. Naruto then whipped his tail and smashed Nefarian into the wall before Nefarian tried to take to the skies. Naruto launched after him and caught him just outside the mountain before he grabbed Nefarian's legs and pulled him down before smashing his axe tail into Nefarian's chest and launching them down back into the mountain, where they landed with a crash. Nefarian spit up blood before he felt something smash into his throat, then again, and again before he blacked out and then was dead. Naruto raised his tail again and brought it down to fully sever Nefarian's head. He then leapt up to the top of the mountain and roared out to the sky as the echoes crossed the world. Teldrassil. All the druids, hunters, and priestesses awoke with a start as the roar reached their ground, and for some reason one hunter and priestess awoke not being afraid, but feeling warm, safe, protected, and cared for. She didn't understand it and decided to speak to the high priestess in the morning. Meanwhile, said high priestess awoke with a start as the roar that reached her ears made her feel something that she hadn't felt in years: hope. She felt hope for her people and for a certain someone she met years ago. However, the roar did not just stir things up in Teldrassil, it hit every person connected to nature, connected to the dragons, or was a dragon, orcs, tauren, trolls, dwarves, blood elves, humans, gnomes, undead, goblin, naga, and any race capable heard the call and felt either fear, admiration, pride, or comfort, even those in Outland. Icecrown. Arthas awoke with a start as the roar washed over Northrend. His loves awoke too, as did most of the fortress before Arthas was down on the balcony outside the throne looking out towards the direction of Kalimdor as his loves and the others moved to catch up to him. "My king, what was that?" Kel asked, as he had never felt something so powerful and wild before, and Arthas smirked. "That, Kel, was my son," he simply stated as everyone gained a stunned and awed look to their faces. "My son is a dragon at last," he stated with pride as he stared out across the plains of Northrend with a proud smile on his face. He then turned and returned to his chambers while the others continued to stare before Kin smiled. "Go Nissan," she said with enthusiasm before turning to her adoptive mother. "Kasen, when can we do more training?" she asked with a grin while Conan looked at her with a gentle smile. "Later, Kin-chan. Right now you need some sleep," she stated, and Kin yawned before nodding and left with her adopted parents and uncle to go to sleep. Naruto's mothers left next, each feeling pride at his accomplishment, Alexstrasza especially, and the others left slowly after until only Naruto's mates were left, and they smiled warmly in the direction of their husband before they all left together, as they slept in the same room, to await their husband's return. Back with Naruto. Naruto finished his roar and dropped back into the mountain before shifting back to his human form. His fingers were now permanently claws, his eyes were slitted with the slit being silver, and he had scales over his torso and legs. He approached his sword, which was vibrating like crazy before he grasped it, and it glowed bright before revealing its new form. It was pure obsidian-colored serrated Zweihander that was just under his height, about 6 feet 6 inches, and had his runes engraved along the blade. The handle was black and went up to a dragon's head that the blade was coming out of, while wing-like handguards came out of the sides and were sharpened blades themselves. At the hilt was a fox skull holding a crimson jewel in its maws. Within the jewel was a cerulean Uzumaki spiral spinning. The dragon's eyes were silver while the fox's eyes were crimson, while both figureheads were obsidian black as well. Just above the dragon head was a small handle area for Naruto to grab a hold of if needed. Naruto gazed at the blade before smirking as he was planning on getting a more intimidating sword to use, and his sword seemed to recognize that. His sheath then shifted into a long version to hold it, and Naruto was going to sheath his sword, but then he got a fun idea. He channeled his power to the sheath and it shrank to the size of a simple short sword, and he took his brush and ink and drew inside the sheath a special seal before he then activated it with chakra and sheathed his blade. The blade, despite it should have having reached the end of the sheath, kept being fed inside until the hilt hit the top with a click, and he strapped it to his back while grinning as his space seal allowing him to use a short sword sheath on a much larger sword. He looked over the two dragon corpses and got a crazy idea before he sealed the two away in separate scrolls before preparing to exit the mountain after having some clones start setting explosive tags everywhere to ensure the nest was gone. He then stumbled upon the treasure hoard of the great dragon and sealed it all up while setting a portion of the gold aside for himself before he left for the entrance. However, he didn't make it far from the mountain before he saw something that made him pause. Before him was a simple dragon hatchling that looked to have recently hatched and was sitting in front of him like a pet of some kind. He decided to test that theory and simply got his armor back on and began walking while the whelp started walking behind him before Naruto stopped and patted his shoulder. "Come on," he stated, and the hatchling ran up and climbed on his shoulder before licking his face. "All right, calm down," he stated, and the hatchling obeyed and curled around his neck protectively before going to sleep. Naruto chuckled at the sight before taking off for Ashenvale Forest. 3 weeks later, Demon Fall Canyon. Naruto, and his companion that he took to calling Soren, stood before the grave of Grommash Hellscream. Naruto had already sealed Manoroth's blade away and had utterly destroyed the bones and pool of toxic blood that was left behind, except the skull, as he was using that as his proof. He also killed some cultists that were trying to resurrect Manoroth in order to serve him and drink his demonic blood. Now he needed to call forth Grommash Hellscream. He channeled magic to his hands and slammed them to the ground, and a few moments later a hand shot out of the ground and clawed its user free before he stood before Naruto. Naruto simply handed him his axe. "Grommash Hellscream, my father wishes to thank you for killing the Pit Lord Manoroth and wished me to bring you back to life," Naruto stated as the orc took his axe and stared at Naruto with his now red eyes. "And what does your father wish of me in return, Death Knight?" he stated with a hint of aggression to his voice, and Naruto shook his head. "Nothing. Had he been his predecessor, then he would have demanded your loyalty, but, as you can feel, you have your free will and desires and can simply do as you please. My father wouldn't turn down your aid if you did join us, but he isn't going to force you either. My father is simply repaying a debt he feels he owes you for destroying the Pit Lord and setting the orcs free from the blood curse," Naruto stated, and Grom nodded as he could feel his free will and was pleased the boy had not lied. He then gazed over himself. He was a grayer orc now and had a large burn mark on his chest from where the Pit Lord exploded when Grom slammed his axe into the demon. He then idly wondered what the Horde had been doing and if they will accept him. But then there was the entity he owed his new chance to, and decided he may as well hear the man's proposal. "Very well, young one, I will hear your father's proposal," Grom stated, and Naruto nodded before handing him a hearthstone. "I apologize for not going back with you, but I have another mission I must complete," he stated, and Grom nodded before vanishing due to the hearthstone, and Naruto headed for Darkshore. Since there were human Death Knights running around, he shouldn't arouse that much suspicion. 1 month later, Teldrassil Port. As Naruto believed, he had no trouble charting a boat to the tree island of the Night Elves and had proceeded to enter the town of Darnassus before he was stopped by 2 female guards atop saber cats. Are you the Death Knight that recently arrived?" asked one of them, and Naruto debated lying before he decided if needed he could change forms and get out of there. So with that in mind, he nodded, and the 2 guards looked towards each other. "Priestess Tyrande requests your presence," the other guard stated, and Naruto nodded before following them as they led him to the location the priestess was at, while he could feel people staring at him as he walked. The women with blushes and whispers, the men with looks of intrigue or thinking he wasn't that strong, and the guards with looks of respect. It only took a few minutes to reach the building, which was a moonwell if Naruto remembered correctly, and entered when the guards bid him to. He entered and found the fabled Tyrande Whisperwind there with another night elf girl that blushed and fidgeted every time he looked at her. that had pale lighter purple skin and dark blue hair and wore a bra-like breastplate that showed her cleavage to be almost half the size of Kira's, pauldrons that looked like a lion and tiger's head that reached across into a small chest piece directly below her throat with a pale pink gem on it. A circlet with a pale purple gem in the center of it. Gauntlets that reached her mid-forearms with leaf designs on them. Knee-high boots that had trees designed on them, and a thong-style armor piece over her crotch with a semi-skirt piece attached to the rear. No pun intended. Her entire armor was a pale pinkish purple and she had a dark purple bow on her back with a quiver attached as well with a dark purple cloak lying near her right by a large glaive. All in all she looked like a, yet competent, hunter and fighter. Naruto bowed lightly, just enough for respect but not enough to be a sign of submission, and the bow was returned. You know who I am, don't you, milady? Naruto asked and Tyrande nodded which caused Naruto to smile. Then I can freely state this. Ner'zhul is dead and my father now rules the scourge. He stated getting the younger girl to widen her eyes before Naruto presented Tyrande with a letter addressed to my lunar priestess and Tyrande took it and read it. My lunar priestess, much has transpired since that day I met you in Ashenvale Forest and helped you fend off those Dune guards and spent those days aiding you in getting the druids awakened and then helping Illidan stop Tichondrius. While my heart was partially broken when I had to leave you, or risk my former master discovering you and my feelings, I have never forgotten you nor stopped caring about you. While my feelings for you have only grown, you need to understand I have other loves and they have agreed to share me. I have destroyed Ner'zhul and have taken the throne for myself some 2 decades ago and I am sorry for not getting word to you sooner as it was too risky while my enemies were so close to my borders. The man before you, my son, has changed that and has become my agent and already has begun changing the tides of the world. If you would be with me, and I pray to any god or goddess that would hear me that you will, then my son has a hearthstone that will take you to Icecrown, to me. I love you Tyrande, and no matter your choice I will not go to war with your people, but I also cannot allow any attacks on my soldiers to go unanswered either. I await your reply and wish to end the prejudice of this world and Outland. With all my heart, I love you, Tyrande Whisperwind. Signed, Arthas Manethil. She read and smiled as tears flowed freely as she folded the letter and smiled at him. Thank you for this. I apologize but I don't know your name, only titles that have been given to you. Tyrande stated and Naruto nodded. Ammon Manethil is my given name. My original name was Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. He then turned towards the girl who was still blushing at him. And what is your name, if I may ask? He stated with a smile that made her blush grow and Tyrande giggled slightly. This is Farah Windwalker. She is one of my apprentices for being a high priestess and a well-respected up-and-coming hunter and, apparently, you are her ideal mate. She stated with a smirk as the now identified Farah blushed brighter and Naruto looked at her confused. Her ideal mate? He asked, while his demon and draconic blood wasn't opposed to another mate and neither was he mind you, but he would rather get to know a woman before she became his mate. Tyrande nodded. Yes, you see, hunters are naturally in tune with animals including the types that find a mate in strong or specific partners. When the roar you exuded, and I can tell it was you based on the fact that it filled me with hope about Arthas instead of love, hit her, she was filled with warmth and felt protected, comforted, and cared for. In other words, she felt loved when she heard your roar. She stated and Naruto blinked before nodding slowly. I see, I am not opposed to it should she seek a relationship with me, but I would like to get to know her first. That is if you are not objecting to it. He stated and Farah looked up hopefully at Tyrande who smiled at her and nodded. Farah smiled and approached Naruto. I hope we can be happy together, Ammon. She stated and Naruto smiled before pulling her flush to him and started stroking her sides slowly and sensually. I hope so too, Farah. He stated before kissing her cheek and she blushed at the actions before laying her head on Naruto's chest while Tyrande smirked in the background. Naruto then turned towards Tyrande. Will there be any problems from your people? Naruto asked, knowing that if she accepted then her people were joined with his father's army, and Tyrande shook her head. Aside from a man named Fandral Staghelm, many have already begun to respect Arthas as we began to suspect that something major had changed when most of the remaining undead from the Legion's invasion vanished and the land had begun to heal itself as the taint was taken from it. This was only reinforced when the dragons began to aid the Scourge, Theramore began to stop aiding anyone of the Alliance, and the Forsaken began losing ground. she stated, and Naruto nodded before releasing Farah. I can handle Fandral. If he isn't dealt with, then he could stir up other druids or find some allies. He stated, and Tyrande nodded. While I deal with him, you have to keep others from being involved. He stated, and Tyrande nodded. He should be in a grove not too far to the northeast from here that he uses for meditation. She stated, and Naruto nodded before he turned and left and started walking towards where the highest amount of mana outside of the city was located, with Farah following him. A few minutes later, he came to stand before a night elf with pinkish-purple skin, grass-green hair that reached past his shoulders, with a lower robe piece, pauldrons, and gauntlets that looked to be leather with feathers and fur on them, and his chest was bare while he had green markings going over him. In his hands was a wooden staff with the top appearing like a snake head and blue runes on the top of it. This was Fandral Staghelm, the supposed leader of the Night Elves since Malfurion Stormrage went into the Emerald Dream and hadn't come out, and current Archdruid for the same reason he was the supposed leader. Said elf looked at Naruto as he handed Soren to Farah and told him to behave before he stepped closer to Fandral and slammed his hands on the ground, causing a large seal array to spread over the area. Naruto stood and walked before standing a few feet from Fandral, who frowned. Has that woman finally hired someone to kill me? He asked, and Naruto chuckled. No, I am doing this because my father has a strong dislike for you and your superior attitude. Naruto stated before launching a fireball from his hand at the man, who widened his eyes and moved before he had to jump as tendrils of shadow sprang up to impale him. He landed before he was launched back into a tree by an invisible force, with his staff getting knocked away while Naruto just had his hand stretched out towards him. Fandral growled and shifted into his bear form to charge at Naruto, who stood still before launching an ice spear at him. He dodged it before he was smashed to the side by a spin kick from Naruto. Naruto then rushed forward and delivered an axe kick to Fandral's spine that created a crater under him before Naruto then punted him into a cliffside. Fandral turned back to his elf form and coughed up blood while Naruto was finding his muscles had really gotten amped up since his dragon blood unlocked fully before he noticed Fandral changed into a leopard and rushed him with renewed speed before Naruto sidestepped, allowing Fandral to fly past him. At least, he would have if Naruto hadn't grabbed his tail and swung him on the ground before spinning and throwing him into the cliffside again. Farah watched in awe as her future mate handled Fandral like a child. Tyrande stood beside her, having arrived shortly after Fandral accused her of hiring Naruto, and others had begun to show up after seeing the Demon Knight and the High Priestess head towards this area. They were of course surprised to see Fandral being handled like a low-ranked amateur. Fandral stood and changed into a panther and disappeared as Naruto sighed. You want a shape-shifting battle? Fine, he stated before he shifted into a silver nine-tailed fox that was as large as the saber cats that the night elf guards used, much to the shock of everyone present, before he growled and leapt on the panther and began biting its neck, causing it to roar in pain before they began tumbling around the area, with Naruto not letting go of Fandral's neck, and he began digging his claws into the sides of him. Naruto then wrapped his tails around Fandral's legs and flung him into a tree where he shifted back to normal, and so did Naruto. Fandral was now bleeding from his neck and ribs while he had some bald spots on his head, while Naruto crossed his arms and tapped his foot impatiently. Whenever you're ready, fool. I'm on a schedule here, he stated, and Fandral saw red and began casting wave after wave of moonfire at Naruto, who simply drew his sword, shocking everyone who believed it was a simple short sword, and spun it above his head rapidly. The moonfire struck the blade and the blade seemed to absorb it before he stopped and set it on his shoulder, loving the shocked look on Fandral's face. What? Don't you know who I am? He asked as Fandral kept the shocked look. Guess not. My name is Ammon Manethil, my father is Arthas Manethil. My mothers are Sylvanas Windrunner, Jaina Proudmoore, Queen Alexstrasza, and Tiffin Alarian Rin. I am a human, a demon, an undead, and a dragon, Naruto stated as he swung his blade, and the moonfire launched out in a large blast that Fandral was barely able to dodge before the blast smashed into the cliffside and took out a large enough section for an ancient protector to fit inside and still have some room. Fandral then shifted into a crow form and tried to fly away before Naruto threw his sword and it cut one of his wings off. Fandral plummeted and turned back as he landed, only now his left arm was gone. Naruto stuck his hand out and called his sword back with a Bansho tendon and walked forward as Fandral was on his knees from blood loss and mana drain. When Naruto got close, Fandral attempted to capture him with entangling roots, but Naruto flared his death-like aura and the roots withered away before he stabbed Fandral through the heart with his Zweihander and felt his powers increasing before Fandral slumped over dead, and Naruto then beheaded him and sealed the head. As Naruto sheathed his sword, the seal array shrunk before clapping and cheering was heard from the night elves. Naruto smiled and walked towards Tyrande, who smiled and ruffled his hair. "You're going to be a handful as a son, aren't you?" she asked, and the other elves were surprised at this, and Naruto smirked. "Doubt it. Sylvanas Kazan's only complaint is that I don't favor a bow over a gun. Jaina Kazan's complaint was that I was more geared towards actual combat over magic. Alexstrasza Kazan's complaint was that she didn't get as much time with me as the others. Tiffin Kazan is only sad that I couldn't get her away sooner. So if those are the only complaints, then I don't think I'll be much trouble," he stated as Soren climbed up his back and went back to his spot around Naruto's neck. "I hope to see you at Ice Crown soon, Tyrande Kazan," he stated, and Tyrande smiled, feeling that since he used it on the other women that it had some form of meaning for mother, before hugging him and then nodding. Naruto then handed her a hearthstone. "This will take you to the frozen throne," he stated, and she nodded. "Anyway, I need to go. There is one last person father wants me to get to Ice Crown, and it involves going to Outland. Then I can go home," Naruto stated, and Tyrande frowned slightly in thought before widening her eyes and nodding. "I see. Well, Farah will be going with you naturally," she stated, and Naruto nodded. "Of course. I can't leave my potential mate without even getting to know her first," he stated, and Farah blushed while Tyrande smiled and nodded. "Yes. Say hello to Maiev when you see her in case I am unable to be at Ice Crown when you return," she stated, and the elves were shocked again while Naruto nodded. "Will do. Come on, Farah, we can get to know each other along the way," he stated before grabbing Farah and holding her close to him, which she blushed at before snuggling in close to him, and he used a hearthstone he had synced to Theramore before vanishing. 11 months later. Outland, Shadowmoon Valley. Naruto, Farah, Soren, and Farah's pet night stalker named Sven were standing outside the warden's cage where Maiev Shadowsong was imprisoned. After arriving at Theramore, they moved north to Ratchet before paying for passage to Booty Bay and then moving north up through Stranglethorn, where they were slowed by trolls and local wildlife. Then they traveled up and around to the Blasted Lands before entering the Dark Portal. From there they mounted their respective flying mounts, a hippogriff and winged steed, and began traveling through Hellfire Peninsula, Terakar Forest, where they had to walk or risk being seen by the Alliance and Horde patrols surrounding the area to ensure Shatrath was safe, and then entered Shadowmoon Valley where they had to explore and learn about Illidan, Kael'thas, Vosh, and Akama's whereabouts as well as where Maiev was, as there were times she would be moved for any information that Illidan hadn't been able to get out of her yet. They had decreased a section of guards at the warden's cage by killing a large contingent of the Broken at the ruins of Bari before they then came to the cage. Naturally, Naruto and Farah grew close during that time, and Naruto had told her he would be happy to have her as one of his mates, which earned him quite a few nights of make-outs and groping. Here and now, they were where they needed to be, and Naruto scooped Farah up bridal style while a clone grabbed Sven and they ran up the wall, and Farah killed 2 Naga guards with her bow before they reached the top of the wall. Naruto looked around before noticing quite a few of the Draenei of this world should have clearly seen the 2 Naga killed, but weren't reacting. Naruto then noticed a satyr and felt a large amount of hate for the being from the Draenei. Seeing the satyr out in the open, Naruto leapt over him and drew his sword before bringing it down upon him, cutting him clean in half. He then twisted and bisected the imps that were with the satyr and found the Draenei staring at him before they pointed to a lower chamber area. "You have arrived, chieftain. Akama awaits you down there," one of the Draenei stated, and Naruto raised an eyebrow before Farah joined him along with Sven. Naruto followed the Draenei's direction and walked down before finding another Draenei who pointed to a pool of water. Getting the idea, Naruto entered followed by Farah and Sven and swam a short way before coming up into a chamber with the infamous Draenei Akama and Maiev Shadowsong standing there. Akama bowed low. "It is my honor to meet you, chieftain," Akama stated, and Maiev looked shocked before Naruto approached her and handed her a letter addressed to "My Queen of Blades," and Maiev widened her eyes before taking it and reading it. "My dearest Maiev, I have successfully ended Ner'zhul and ruled the Scourge. I have taken wives and wish for you to become one as well because I love you as much as I did when I was forced to leave you. The man before you is my son, Ammon, and he is to bring you to me if you still hold the love for me that you held when I was forced to leave you after the Battle of Mount Hyjal. I have never forgotten you, my Ev, and still love you to this day. I am filled with regret that I could not rescue you sooner, and while I know you wish to end Illidan for his crimes, I wish for you to come to me so I may hold you in my arms again and be able to coordinate my forces to strike Illidan and his master down. I already have the Scourge, Forsaken, a large contingent of humans, and the dragons on my side, and, if my son was successful, I will have the Night Elves on my side as well. I promise you that the final strike will be yours and yours alone, but you cannot defeat him alone. I pray you will come to me so we may be together again. With a heart filled with love for you, Arthas Menethil II Lich King. She read and smiled warmly at it. I thank you, Ammon. Tell me when it is time and I will return with you to the Frozen Throne. She stated, and Naruto nodded before turning to Akama. I sense much confusion within you, chieftain. The simple answer is this. For years now, myself and the Deathsworn of the Ashdung clan have been having visions of someone coming to lead us to a new world and a new hope for our future. The sword you wield, the armor you wear, the dragon you have tamed, and those eyes you use, we have seen each and every one of them. We have spent the last 5 years keeping our ears to the ground and our eyes open for the one that we were to follow and prepared to leave this place once we found him. Akama informed, and Naruto widened his eyes in surprise before nodding. Very well. How long will it take you to gather your people? He asked, and Akama thought for a minute. A day at the most. Akama stated, and Naruto nodded. All right. Have them converge here and I will get you transport to Icecrown once I bring my Ed there to see my father. Is that agreeable? Naruto stated and asked, and Akama nodded. Of course, chieftain. He stated, and Naruto nodded. Very well. Begin at once and I will return in a day's time. Naruto stated before he placed a seal on the wall of the chamber and then placed a hand on his newest mother, held Farah close to him, and Sven pressed against his legs before using a hearthstone to return to Icecrown. 3 weeks later, Icecrown Citadel. Naruto stood before his father with his mothers, 2 of whom were expecting, his new mothers Tyrande and Maev. A potential new mother in the undead Onyxia, his mates, friends, and new soldiers watching the proceedings. The day Naruto returned, he presented his father with the scrolls showing his success in all but 4 secondary objectives, however him bringing Nefarian's corpse made up for it. He then explained to his father the details of each mission and what happened with Onyxia before giving him his idea. He had then resurrected Onyxia and freed her from her father's corruption. When that occurred, she then begged Alexstrasza and Arthas forgiveness and was granted it before both offered her a place beside Arthas if she wished it. She had blushed and stated she wanted to get to know him first and was granted that. On another note, apparently Grom had taken up a position in Arthas' growing army and was even courting Illyria, and the two seemed happy. Speaking of courting, Makoto, Farah, and Sally had been accepted by Kyuubi and Verisa as Naruto's future mates, wives. However, he had not claimed any of them yet as he wanted to rest for now since he had been gone for a long time. He also wanted to celebrate with his family as Jaina was pregnant with twins and was 4 months along, and Sylvanas was pregnant at 2 months. They all celebrated as it was unclear if an undead could reproduce or not, and Sylvanas had given up on having children. They had then discovered, much to their increasing love of Naruto, that he had been exuding a demonic and draconic aura that worked similar to how blighted ground healed undead. Only his worked on any allies of his, and the aura purified, healed that little problem and made it possible to have children, which Maev, Alexstrasza, and Tyrande were joyous about, as well as they wanted to have children with Arthas and feared their time may have passed. Now you all are wondering how come Maev and Tyrande weren't at each other's throats? Well, the simple answer is Tyrande, through Arthas, saw how she had hurt Maev, as the Watchers were her only family after her brother died, and Maev had plenty of time to think in her cell, and Arthas also showed her that the Legion would have won if Illidan hadn't consumed the skull of Gul'dan and killed Tichondrius. They both began to see it from the other's perspective and accepted their mistakes and forgave and forgot, which was furthered by their time with Arthas in the bedchambers, as he would not favor one wife over the other, and they all shared intimate time with him. As he promised, Naruto had returned to the Warden's cage and had gotten 150, give or take a few, Draenei out of there via a reverse summoning seal that he tied to Icecrown and began sending them over before he and his clones went explosive note happy on the area and turned it into a pile of rubble that no one would have left remains if they were caught in it. Now Naruto knelt before his father who had Frostmourne drawn and he stepped towards his son. He lowered Frostmourne onto Naruto's shoulder. Ammon Menethil, also known as Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, I do hereby name you heir to the frozen throne and commander of my death knights and army. May your enemies tremble before your might, for you are death itself and you will spare no enemy that dares to cross you. Arise Ammon Menethil, the Prince of Death. Arthas stated and the group cheered as Naruto arose with his eyes hungry for battle. This world is divided now, but soon it will be united under one banner, one kingdom, one ruler. Long live the Lich King and glory to the Scourge. Naruto shouted with his fist in the air and group cheered louder. Now they must prepare for the war that will be the last war over land and territory, the last war with the Burning Legion, and most importantly, the last war of a divided Azeroth, and Naruto plans to be leading that war right from the front lines and striking down any enemies that dare stand in his way. THSTA all for now. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments.